So listen, I actually wanted to watch this this video here from Unknown Player. This is actually a recording with him and Bife, and they're talking about the Bungie disaster and Destiny's future. Listen, I think at this point, people are like, God, dog it, Cross. How many more videos on this topic? I like to know insight from folks in the community, and especially Bife here, and gratefully for us, Unknown is able to interview his thoughts on this as well. But let's start this from the very beginning here. Guys, we're gonna be watching this right here, the Bungie disaster and Destiny's future, featuring Bife. By the way, links to this video and to Unknown's YouTube account are down below.
Of Destiny 3 is too risky. In a vacuum, the idea of Destiny 3 is too risky. In a vacuum, I can absolutely understand that statement being true.
Yeah.
Right?
It's just
but
hard
then
to understand.
if it is too much of a risk and you already have something that works, I can then understand slowly spinning out other projects and making new IPs and making sure they're good and solid.
Yeah.
But why 5 different incubation projects? I was literally about
to say that. I was literally about to say, but why 5 of them? Like one or two, but like 5? I was literally about to say that exact sentence. Like 5?
That is so true though, right? Yeah, that's Bife right here on the right. This is Unknown. Unknown is a fantastic content creator. He's one of the OGs, man. He goes like way back when there was, more console in him. I mean, this was a guy that many of us look to for everything Destiny news, Destiny content, especially in the D1 days, if y'all remember.
Welcome back to another podcast episode. Today, quite a lot to talk about. Quite strange times for Destiny. We just came off, easily one of the best expansions in Destiny history, like pretty unanimously. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Final Shape is and was an absolute masterpiece. And then straight into something else, which is quite easily to say one of the worst times for both Destiny and Bungie's history. But it is kind of weird how quickly the two collided into each other. But yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of kind of not so great news, but there is some silver linings and we do have some good stuff to talk about as well. We do need to recap Final Shape, and now that the kind of honeymoon phase is over and we can kind of objectively, now that the dust has settled, we can more just calmly look at, just really sing the praise of how good Final Shape is and was. But yeah, how are you and what have you been up to?
Oh man, from the most crushing of lows to the dizziest of highs to the most crushing of lows again. I think we all have gone through a roller coaster in the last 5 months.
Yeah.
I say we, I guess I should clarify, the Destiny community. Content creators as well, because Lord knows we had Into the Light dropping and all of a sudden it seemed like things might actually be turning a corner, and then the Final Shape drops, and briefly up until the release of Elden Ring, which just about squeezes Final Shape out of the top slot, we are the #1 released game of the year on Metacritic, which is insane to me.
That is wild, dude. That is wild. If you looked at just like Lightfall and that experience last year, guys, the fact that we have, or I guess besides the Elden Ring, right? We had the #1 spot as far as ratings go on Metacritic is wild.
The Destiny expansion has never gotten that high. So, critically, it was the best. And then, second round of layoffs came along, and it turns out that the Final Shape performing as well as it didn't technically matter. And that's crushing.
Yeah.
I don't know any other way to put it. I think it's terrible for us in the community. Of course, it's terrible for us as content creators, but I think it's also worth sparing a thought for the developers, The word internally from a bunch of different reports. I believe Jason Schreier and Paul Tassi have done the lion's share of reporting on this from the sort of summary side of things. And of course, Jason always has good inside eyes, but his work on what happened in the studio was basically that the developers were told that Final Shape was make or break, and now already there were trust issues with the Bungie leadership team, but now there are serious trust issues with the Bungie leadership team because they're now being told that Marathon is make or break. And you just have to sit there and imagine what the morale is like inside the studio after you've been told umpteen times that the next thing is make or break and that more layoffs will happen if things don't work out. Eventually you just treat management with scorn to a certain degree, I imagine. And that means great games don't get made because you can't trust the people above you who are giving you the calls,
Yeah, I believe it's like I'm not sure exact numbers. I'm not sure if anyone really knows. There's been a lot of numbers floating around, but we believe it.
Yo, your kids are on their way.
I bet.
220 roles in Bungie were laid off, which is 17% of the studio, and then an additional 12% was integrated into Sony, which is 155 roles. So is it overall like 35% of Bungie is no longer at Bungie and has been moved over?
Yeah, I think the total number, if you also include the layoffs from last year, you're looking at a studio that went from a size of 1,300 people to about 850.
Yeah.
So that's including a whole bunch of different things across 2 different sets of layoffs, the integration of some employees with Sony Interactive Entertainment where those jobs could be saved, and also the 85 developers that have been spun out into their own studio to work on the project that was in incubation that was codenamed Gummy Bears, whatever that might be.
I believe that was MOBA style, like fighter game. Like I saw a report, I think it was Jason Trier or Paul Tassi, who said it was like a kind of a fighter game, like a Smash Bros type MOBA.
A fighter game with MOBA aspects, which is the most... I have no idea what to expect from that. That sounds like the most confusing mashup of identities I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you take a... I just don't know how you do that. It sounds interesting just because it's a little bit like saying, hi, here's a half cat, here's a half dog. What does that look like? But by that same token, a half cat, half dog also sounds like a bit of an abomination, doesn't it? So
it sounds like a giraffe.
It's...
not just that, it's also just completely random. Not saying that the developers at Bungie are not extremely talented. Obviously they are. But, when you look at what they've done in the past and what they've continued to build on, that FPS sci-fi shooter has been very much the foundation that has carried them for decades, right?
And hey, giraffes are cool. Maybe it is a giraffe, but who knows, right? Like, it's a big question mark, but everyone seems to say that it has promise, so who am I to judge until I've actually seen the damn thing, right?
I mean, they've been working on, by the sounds of it, a lot of different projects, and that also seems to be the problem and why kind of all of this is happening. I think Jason had a pretty good part in his article, which kind of is a top-down summary of all of this. Again, it doesn't go into the nuance of all of it, but he said that he spoke to 10 current and former Bungie employees, so that's a good estimate of obviously 10 people, but also you got current employees who are still there, still have a vested interest in Bungie, but also former employees who aren't there and maybe a bit more would have a different perspective, and they, all together can paint a pretty good picture. But they said, obviously a lot of them, or all of them, didn't want to be identified, but they said they described a company that grew too fast, tried to develop too many projects at once, spread their resources too thin rather than prioritizing its chief moneymaker, Destiny 2, which is kind of the gist of all of this. And obviously that doesn't kind of take any blame away from leadership, because it is leadership's decisions to ride this ship and make a gamble. And a lot of people said that Pete Parsons, who is CEO, CEO, and who is the who's the other guy, like the founder,
Herman Holtz, I believe. Oh no, the the founder of Bungie, Jason. No, I believe you are talking about Jason Jones there.
Is he still there?
He's still there, but I believe he works in, as a lead for one of the unannounced creative projects. Right. But it's also one of those things of, I don't know where all the true old guard of Bungie is, and to be honest, a lot of the old guard of Bungie has left the studio and is gone. Yeah. I mean, some names are a welcome departure, like Martin O'Donnell, who's a tirade of suspect stuff, to names that are actually really horrifying to lose, like Mark Noseworthy, Luke Smith. I mean, ages ago, departing for other things and making his own studio, there was Marcus Leto, who was behind the original design of Master Chief. You have
oh yeah, fine, you like that?
The people who are more recent but still represent really strong foundations from way back in Bungie. And of course, I mean, I can't sit there and not talk about Salvatore. Yep. His loss from the studio as well is just another example of that.
That was last year, yeah.
Yeah.
And even, I believe, Christopher Barrett, also left earlier this year.
Christopher Barrett's a bit of a weird story because the question mark over him was that when Marathon was announced, he was listed as the creative director.
Yeah, he was.
And for the longest time on his bio, he had creative director listed in there at Bungie on an unannounced project. And then shortly after that, a bunch of stuff seemed to happen, and he quietly seemed to sort of leave the project. So his place in the studio is a very big question mark, but I have no idea what's going on with Christopher Barrett, I'll be completely honest.
Yeah, it was announced that they replaced him as the creative director or lead director of Marathon. But they didn't announce his departure, but then someone else, I think another Bungie employee, said that he had left months prior. So there's a lot of, major faces that probably the most recognizable would be Luke Smith. He is very much I'd say the most recognizable
Guard for the tier 2. Thank you so much, brother.
Person at Bungie. And what's interesting about him is that he and Mark Noseworthy, who is also a titan of Bungie, less recognizable because he's more behind the scenes, but Luke Smith has always been at the forefront in trailers, very like community facing. But Mark Noseworthy and Luke Smith were working on Project Payback, which we've heard a lot about recently. The first time we heard about Project Payback was earlier this year when someone on Reddit leaked that Prismatic was a thing and correctly predicted it before it was released. And then in the same post also said that Destiny 3 is in development and it's called Project Payback. And they said in that post that it was Destiny 3, it's not a spin-off, it's not anything else, it's a full-on Destiny 3 that's being developed, and it's called Project Payback. So it's interesting because half of that is right and half of it is wrong, because it is again that they did accurately predict it is called Payback. So they knew something, and they also spoke to developers. But now we've heard that Project Payback wasn't Destiny 3; it was a separate spin-off that was somewhat first person and somewhat third person, and it was apparently was very good, but it was more like a kind of a Warframe Genshin type of game. And it uses the characters. It was Destiny. It would use the Destiny characters in the franchise, exploring a large world, apparently co-op, battling monsters and solving puzzles, which actually sounded like really good. But it wasn't Destiny 3, but it was a spin-off. But it was like third-person, first-person elements. I guess it switches between the two. But that's now been cancelled. So that was Project Payback, which was a spin-off that Mark and Luke were working on. And but what's even more crazy is that they've obviously left the company. I don't think they were laid off. I think it was more that, they shut down the project, and then Mark and Luke were like, okay, so the thing we're working on is no longer. We now have a choice of, we can go continue working on Destiny 2, which I don't think any of them really wanted to. I think they're probably like done with Destiny, especially Destiny 2. They've been working on they're working on Destiny for like more than a decade at this point, so I don't think they have interest in going backwards to Destiny 2. And there might not have been a role for them. Maybe it would have been a pay cut, because there probably isn't a position, because they're senior directors and developers. I don't think there would have been a role for them in Destiny 2 or Marathon, which again, similar. Maybe all the roles are filled, maybe they didn't want to work on Marathon. So it wasn't so much that they were laid off, it's more that they just didn't see there wasn't a role for them in the company, and they probably chose to leave. I don't think they would have been, I don't think they would have been fired or like let go. But they probably decided themselves this isn't really what we want. And obviously they're very, very capable people, and obviously I'm sure they've been paid well, so they would probably rather maybe start their own studio or work for someone else. And
yeah, I'm really curious to see where Luke and Mark go from here. They have been a presence, a very known presence, through pretty much all of Destiny's life. And so I'm curious to know, are they out? I kind of feel like, especially considering the last thing that Luke said to us, I feel like there's just a lot more that he wants to cook. Question is who's going to pick those guys up, or if they go do their own thing.
But that is very, very big. The fact that Luke Smith is, because he's always been, and even the crazy part is that right before Final Shape, he was of course in that Vidoc. In the very beginning, he did a specific message saying like, hey, Destiny we're still working on Beyond Destiny. I forget the exact words, but he said Destiny isn't going anywhere.
Destiny 2 isn't going anywhere. We'll tell you more about what happens after Final Shape when the Witness and the battle with it is concluded. And we'll tell you more about what's happening in Destiny 2 and beyond.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'll say this as well. The internal messaging of Bungie was spot on when that moment happened, because that's the reputation of Luke Smith, and to a certain extent as well, Mark Noseworthy. You know, these have been the stewards of Destiny as a franchise since The Taken King, which is considered the first high point in Destiny, where, you know, it was the first moment at which people would really gravitate towards it and where people would latch on. This is a fundamentally important figure in Destiny's history, because he represents the good times and the strong expansions that have come out and really defined Destiny. When they sat there and said that Final Shape needs to exemplify Witch Queen, Taken King, and Forsaken, you know, they knew what they were talking about, and that's why
brought up the bangers, man.
Front. To see him leave, I mean, there's no other way to describe it other than crushing. You know, he was the... This is the guy who, when Destiny 2 was first getting announced, was one of the first people on stage at the Destiny 2 reveal event. Him being attached to Project Payback tells you all you need to know about Payback, which was that it was a serious project. And I think, for what it's worth, I know people have been back and forth about the direction of everything, but no one internally said that Payback was looking like it was in a bad state.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to remember as well is that when you're...
Or really, I don't think I haven't heard anything about Payback as far as like what the gameplay experience was like for it. And you know, that's what we were talking about last week. Was like, I wonder if Sony themselves have even played Payback.
Going for this different kind of game, you can make a much more sort of... It might be a bit nebulous to describe it as a tighter experience, but think of it from the perspective of what they were describing versus Destiny. Destiny has an enormous pile of loot. You as a main unnamed protagonist who occasionally speaks, but for the most part has to be silent so you can kind of imprint what you think onto that character. And if you take this alternative direction where it's all known characters, you get to interact with them, you have this set series of powers, all of a sudden you get the ability to craft tighter gameplay scenarios, different narratives that are more focused on those individuals. It could really have worked, and I would have loved to have seen what they would have done with it, especially on the basis of what you were fighting. Solving puzzles and fighting big monsters? I mean, you know, Destiny, sure, occasionally you just have a Hive Ogre or a Vex Hydra or whatever, but Destiny has no shortage of big monsters when you really think about it. The Ahamkara alone are an entire expansion for a game like that. You know, you sit down and you're like, okay, the Great Hunt is happening. All of a sudden, you have an entire series of dragon hunts you're going on. It's... A game like that could well have worked. And I was, honestly, I'm gutted to hear that something like this has been cancelled over everything else.
And it probably would have been the only time that we could have played as Mara and then bought in the Eververse store a Mara Beach outfit. That probably could have been the one and only opportunity we could have gotten. Because you know it would have popped up. Like at first they would have been like, hey, right, normal outfits, you know, some ornaments here and there. And then all of a sudden they're going to be like, all right, unleash it. Let's get that two-piece out there right now.
It's also, I'll go back to something you said originally with this, which is that it's really strange to me, the part of that which the original leaker got wrong, which is that Payback was actually not ever Destiny 3, right? You'd think that that would have been the most salient detail with regards to something like that, because you would imagine that would be something you could have been able to confirm immediately.
That is right,
Even if you were just looking at this from internal...
What he's talking about, guys, there was a Reddit post that came out last year that predicted so many things, including Prismatic. And there were so many things that post got right. But to say Payback was Destiny 3, and then for information to come out and say that Destiny 3 was never in development, that's a really big point to get wrong. So that leads you to two conclusions. Either the person who did experience Payback didn't experience it enough to know anything outside of what they saw on the surface, and they saw Destiny and assumed Destiny 3, or B, it was in fact D3, but Bungie wants to go ahead and kill the thought, because it hurts right now knowing that we didn't get to experience whatever Payback is, but it would hurt a lot more if it was in fact Destiny 3. If Payback was actually D3 and Bungie want to go ahead and just kill that rumor right there and now and say D3 was never in development, you see where I'm coming from? And that's something that I feel like only Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy could answer for us. That's why we would do an interview with them. That would actually be probably the first question we ask. Hey, Were you guys really working on a D3? Was that just a bunch of PR stuff that was being thrown out there that a D3 was not being worked on? Or were you guys, in fact, working on it? They probably never say. You know what I mean?
Rumors and whatnot. It's so strange that that thing was labeled as Destiny 3 and yet it's not Destiny 3, right?
Although they did, in their defense, they did say like was/is, and they did say that they got that information last summer, or maybe, I guess the Bungie developer that they had spoken to, their information was from around the Final Shape reveal of last summer. So they said it could have been out of date and things could change. But they did then make a separate Reddit post saying Destiny 3, literally saying Destiny 3 is Destiny 3, not a spin-off, not something else. It is Destiny 3. So like they did say the information is old, things could have changed, but it is Destiny 3. So I do think at the time the information was accurate. I do think at the time they would have been working on something like Destiny 3, but as we know, things do change. Things change all the time. Things get cancelled. You know, Bungie just decides to lay off 30% of their company. Like, things clearly move at a very rapid pace. So I do think at the time, the original source of the information, the Bungie developer or developers, it probably was Destiny 3, or maybe they were just told it was Destiny 3, but maybe at some point then it kind of got transformed into a bit more of a different project. They did also say at the time, which now makes more sense, they did say that they're going to get rid of classes. So no Titan, Hunter, and Warlock. It will just be... Right. And that makes a lot of sense. With this new third-person adventure, just different game.
That's playing as characters.
You'd be playing as just Saladin or Shaxx or Akora, and you're just running around just doing so. And that would make sense. Obviously, still, you know, these characters are technically... they have classes, but they just have abilities. So that makes perfect sense now.
And again, when we first heard this, we were like, a classless Destiny, that just doesn't. But if it is hero based and you're playing as, you know, Saladin, Shaxx, Saint, Mora, Ikora, Zavala, right, then that makes a lot more sense.
The whole thing about, and again, like this original leaker, we all know that they're telling the truth even more. Like, their information has been proved more and more credible. Them saying this game Payback is not going to have classes, now we can understand exactly why this spin-off game wouldn't have had classes. But it isn't Destiny 2. That's the main difference. But it doesn't really change much of the information. But obviously now things have changed. But on top of that, you know, yeah, like, I fully agree. I'm pretty sad about Payback in particular, because honestly, like, it doesn't even have to be Destiny 3, but a game like Payback, I think that would have been enough. That would have been just, you know, it's still Bungie. They would have had top tier sound design and visuals and just graphics, gunplay, everything they've learned about Destiny, a loot system. I'm sure there would have been heavy microtransactions and monetization. They even said, Jason Trier even said, it was similar to Warframe in Genshin, and I don't know a ton about it. I haven't played Genshin, but I know a lot about it and the whole, like, you know, monetization system
of pulls and whatnot.
So, I will say from our pod, we did a breakdown of that entire Friends Per Second podcast with Jason Schreier, and he spoke a lot, you know, more loosely in that conversation. I do want to emphasize that it was mentioned that, like Genshin, like Warframe, that example, it did not mean from a monetization standpoint. Payback was not going to be a gacha game. Okay, that's what I'm trying to point out right there.
So I'm sure they definitely
get over the tier 2. Thank you, man.
Planned it as a way to make a ton of money, because, you know, those games make a ton of money. So I'm sure that would have been a good motivation to do it. It probably wouldn't have required as much investment, probably not as much.
Wow! Hey, stop! Hello!
Cutscenes and like deep story and so much as Destiny 1, 2, or 3, but I think, you know, Payback would have been just from the sounds of it, just like a fun Destiny game, still in the Destiny universe, Destiny characters, but hopefully not as much of an investment, and it could have come out quicker. But it does make me sad that that's not coming out, because I think that would have been honestly exactly what the game needs, just a brand new fresh start, a new gameplay loop.
Okay, so yes, Payback would be cool to have experienced, but I wonder from an investment standpoint, from Sony's perspective, Do you think they probably looked at it and thought, dude, no one's going to play this except Destiny players? And now you're in a situation where you're literally competing against yourself. Like, you're going to be splitting the player base. But like, if you tell the world, hey, we're making this new game called Payback, and they go, oh, cool, what's it about? And you're like, it's about the Destiny universe. And they've never played a Destiny game before. I wonder, what is the likelihood of them playing that game? Like for us, obviously we love the lore. We tune in for all the seasonal stories, now the episodes, right? So I would definitely pick it up. But like, you take someone on who's never played a Destiny game before, and you're like, oh, this is about Shaq saying Hamkar dragons. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, space dragons. You know what I mean? What makes a great game is taking either a concept or a type of game or a narrative you've never experienced before, and just having a way to just bring you into that universe and absorb you. I'm not saying that Payback wouldn't have been able to do that, but it is tough.
And not just another, couple of Destiny episodes, which, as good as they might be, they're still the same thing. Just something new, which is what people want with Destiny 3, something new. And this sounds like it would have been that.
And I think this is the other thing as well. You've got to remember that when it comes to a big franchise of any kind, I mean, just to take one that is way beyond the realms of most things in gaming, look at Star Wars, right? There is no single Star Wars game that truly defines things. There are absolutely contenders for standout games that can be considered iconic, Knights of the Old Republic, Republic Commando, I'd say more recently Jedi Survivor. All of these games that do stand out, but they exist within the universe of Star Wars, and each of those games that I've mentioned is technically a completely different genre and a different style of gameplay. Like, the closest thing that KOTOR and Jedi Survivor share is that they're third person, but one of them is more of an intense action combat and the other is turn-based and very much narrative driven. The point being that big franchises keep things fresh with different approaches to the universe that make things feel different. And whilst I think there would have been eventually a room for a Destiny 3, and I think that's kind of where things need to go now, I still think that having the ability to keep a franchise and just expand it into fresh new directions is what's also really important. It keeps things in the room lively, and this is what it would have done.
I think the only question that I have, yes, Star Wars has as a great example. He's mentioning that there's so many different types of Star Wars games, but Star Wars has been around since what? The 70s? I mean, dude, I grew up, you probably grew up, some of us probably grew up wanting to be a damn Jedi. I'm not saying there's not kids running around wanting to be a Guardian, but like, the impact that those movies had on our life, and then when we got, episodes 1 through 3 in the 2000s, all I'm saying is, like, Star Wars had such a huge impact. You could create all these different games. It's kind of like Marvel. Like Marvel, I'm like not the biggest Marvel fan, but I see these like Marvel people out here that anything that Marvel spits out, whether it's a show or a movie or a spin-off movie or any game, including the mobile games, they will jump on. I'm not really sure if Destiny has that presence, and it's not saying that Destiny is not a good game, but this is where like having a Destiny show, which we thought that was what Bungie was working on, would really aid that, or a Destiny movie, if that would be possible. We thought there was a Destiny TV show being worked on in the background somewhere, and that was going to be a thing, or at least something on the lines of like Arcane, like an Arcane type series for Destiny would be amazing.
That being said, there is a bigger conversation and a bigger context I think that we need to look into here, which is just I think it's fair to call it the irresponsible rapid expansion side of things, and that side of this discussion, because this is something that shouldn't be ignored, and I think there is some context that isn't being spoken about at all, which is the pandemic. I don't know if I can say that word now we don't get demonetized or not, but YouTube being damned, but hey, there it is, Rona happened, and with that, we were all indoors, right? People who were normally working, at very least in a lot of the West, furloughed and, without a job, given some pay by the government, made sure that you were able to sit and exist. You didn't have to pay money for transport to work. You didn't have to worry about a certain number of things. So you had the ability to spend more on video games or anything else that you were doing while you were inside. But video games was a big deal back then because you know, suddenly the only way you could actually interact with people on the regular who were outside of your own house was through digital means. And so video games were a natural pair for that. And a bunch of companies looked at this surge in revenue, and it feels like they ignored the fact that it would not go on forever, right? There were these massive reports of revenue bumping all the way up in 2020 and 2021 when we had all of the lockdowns and whatnot, and companies massively expanded themselves in that time. You know, and this matters because it then pushes into the next few years. And now we're starting to see, as of 2023, 2024, those companies are seeing the contraction that naturally comes from everything returning to normal. And tech is feeling that generally too. It's not the only factor that's gone into this, of course, but it seems as though there are some that have bought into this a whole lot more than others. And I think it's clear to say that Bungie's leadership fell into that trap.
Yeah.
You know, they sat there and saw Destiny as a thing that would continue to be able to support this rapid expansion, and they thought that it was going to be a continuous gravy train, and it very clearly was not. Regardless, even if they just expanded to only Payback, I think it would have actually been fine, but they then had to make a big offering to Sony to make sure that their company was saved, if that makes sense.
Marathon?
I mean, no, it was as in the merger.
Right.
The $3.6 billion merger.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the alternative, according to some, that I believe Jason Schreier interviewed, was that it was either do the big merger or the company faces insolvency.
Yeah.
Dude, that's just so mind-blowing to me. You were facing insolvency when arguably the biggest gaming boom was occurring, that being lockdown. The point is, you're coming off of COVID, right? You're coming off of record high audience retention, player retention, and you've got all this, you know, you've got all this revenue that's coming in, and yet even after that, you're still somehow being faced with insolvency.
Rapid expansion projects and a big gamble, and it feels as though, to me, the picture is we've done all of this stuff, we've dug ourselves in too deep. Let's use this wide portfolio of stuff we've partially built but not completed to convince Sony that our company's value is way bigger than it is, and let's pray that we continue to hit those revenue targets when we make that big merger announcement.
Yeah.
And it just didn't pan out. Now, again, that's one person's perspective and opinion. I don't know if that's correlation to causation. It could be that those are separate series of events that don't really work out, but in my mind, that's kind of the path that leadership has taken, and it speaks to being out of touch with the real world. It speaks to a complete lack of touch with reality to do with the basic fundamentals of what people were doing while the pandemic was going on. And I think it also is overly ambitious without much care for how the studio was doing. And I think it's even clearer when you put it in parallel as a comparison to other game dev studios. And I mean, I'm going to double check this because I want to make sure I get this right, but the immediate competitor and the comparison that people have been making a lot, especially in the last few days, is to Warframe, because it's made by Digital Extreme. They also create one of the larger looter games on the market right now.
Yep.
And, you know, they also went through the same conditions that Bungie did.
Warframe people piss me off though, man. Every time I see something, they're like, just play Warframe. Destiny's going to shit. Play Warframe. Can't find another game? Play Warframe. Your old lady left you? Play Warframe. Dude, fucking Warframe people. It's like, it's getting to the point where it's like, fine, I'll fucking play your game.
I'll say while you look that up, like even on top of that, everything you said, I don't even think that's just one person's opinion. I think that's just a fact. But as well as that, as well as people having, the consumers having more money to spend, as a more macroeconomy level, interest rates were low, so cash was cheap, so companies were going on spending sprees, and we heard that Bungie were going on spending sprees. They bought like a whole new...
Dude, I know, like, I don't know how y'all feel about them, but I feel like maybe whoever's like spending all the money at Bungie might just need to tune in for a few episodes of Dave Ramsey. You know what I mean? Yes, interest rates were low, but you still got to pay that shit back. Obviously, everybody's like, oh, but big companies have to operate off of credit. No, they don't. They fucking don't.
New separate studio. They also expanded to, they bought, I don't know whether it was a studio or a PR agency in Amsterdam as well, but they really, as well as all these projects, they really expanded and a lot of companies went on spending sprees because, again, cash was cheap and interest rates are low. So it kind of lulled everyone into these false senses of just liquid cash, that we can just be invincible and be like how things were before the pandemic. But things kind of snapped back to reality very quickly. And it just, yeah, it seems like they had good intentions. Obviously, their plan was to have lots of projects and lots of games and lots of even outside of games, you know, movie and TV stuff with Netflix and maybe even books and stuff like that. But it seems like they definitely, well, it's definitely not just seems, it is a fact that they obviously overextend themselves.
Yeah. And, you know, to give you an example of the direct parallel, almost everyone in big tech went through layoffs. The Warframe developer Digital Extreme, by comparison as well. But across their whole studio, they spun out into Wayfinder, which was one other project which actually had a series of gameplay betas. It was a finished thing. Like, players were in these games in their early access states.
We played it. We put 40 hours into it last year. And I tried playing Wayfinder the other day, guys. They've completely ditched. Actually, they didn't DE completely ditch it, but Wayfinder itself completely ditched the whole, because it was going to be like, it was going to be an MMO. Like, it was going to be a full-blown MMO world. Now it's like gone into this, it just has this like co-op thing now. But it's more of like a single player game now.
And, you know, it was one of those things where DE was looking to do the model they typically do, which is build your games out with feedback from the fans and make it so that people who are early supporters get rewarded, and then build it into consistent products over time. That's how Warframe has been for over a decade, and it's been successful. But even they expanded a bit too quickly, but the numbers show a completely different respect to it. And this is what I wanted to touch on. Bungie now, even in their first round of layoffs, it was something like 120 odd people. Now 220 in this second round of layoffs. Total of something close to 350 people have left the studio, including smaller departures between those two big rounds of layoffs, right? 350. Across the entirety of their time laying people off, DE has only laid off 30 people. Now granted, smaller studio, fewer people, but regardless, the numbers alone speak to the degrees of caution that were clearly taken by...
Dude, they were just, that's just good guidance, good management, good leadership right there. I don't know how big DE is. How big of a studio is it, chat? How many people? Because obviously that context is important. If it's like 30 people out of 100, that's still, you know, that's still 30%. A little less than 500. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, a little less than 500. That's still way better than Bungie. All right. So if you were to roll the numbers forward, then it would have been the equivalent of if they were Bungie's side, would have been less than 90 people, right? Versus the 300 something people. So yeah, that's a big difference. And that really just shows you what Vibe is saying right there, the caution that studio took. Despite times being great, they still wanted to weather any storms that were coming.
Some studios versus others. And there are some studios that clearly had a responsibility to their workers in mind and didn't manage to fully meet the bar, but at very least weren't betting the whole house.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes hand in hand with the other side of things, which is all of these developers at Bungie, the team of 1,300, most of them were on Destiny, but a huge proportion of them were still on other projects that were not making money at the time.
Yep.
And they were basically scraping the Destiny team as thin as they could so they could make all these other incubation projects. And this is the other thing to keep in mind. Incubating a new project, be it a franchise, a new game, something that is already existing and you need to finish off, doesn't matter what it is, even just the research of what you can do with that and to make that a good product, that's expensive. The amount of money that would have gone into making Marathon a new franchise, I say a new franchise, a returning franchise with a new format alone, staggering cost. I don't even need to know the numbers to know that the cost of that would be staggering, because that's how it works in game dev. But if you were doing 3, 4 of these at a time, you know, if you had Marathon, if you had Gummy Bears, if you had Payback, if you had, quote, 2 other unannounced projects that were all...
Remember, used to be Matter too.
So canned, I believe, was the wording from Jason Schreier. Suddenly you can see what this was. This was like butter scraped over too much bread, as Bilbo Baggins would have put it. Like, they were essentially taking their studio, and throwing so much on the table to gamble with that there wasn't enough to actually support that when none of those bets paid off.
The only
thing they have left is Marathon, and Gummy Bears is technically now its own thing under SIE.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different now. It doesn't necessarily come back to Bungie, and it's 3 dead projects.
Yeah.
And a ton of money wasted and a ton of people laid off for nothing.
Yeah, the
Useless risk taking.
The only thing actually bringing in revenue would have been Destiny 2, and none of the, you're just pouring money in, and also developers' time, which is more money and resources, and none of it's coming back. So
that's the unfortunate part too. It's like, okay, say best case scenario, these games only were in development for a year and a half, you know, but let's just say a year. I guess we could say 2 years because I know Gummy Bears got announced well in advance, but Gummy Bears is moving over to Sony. So therefore, hopefully that game is going, well, I believe that game's still going to ship out, and therefore they'll be able to recoup their investment on that. But Payback, dead in the water. Matter, dead in the water. I mean, you're talking about things you're never going to be able to recoup, plus anything else that was being worked on outside of Marathon and Destiny. So it's just a waste. What I'm saying is, like, you've had people on the payroll. You had tons of resources going into these games, probably narrative teams, developers, directors, all getting paid for nothing.
So as far as Bungie projects, so we have obviously Destiny 2, and then we have Marathon, and then we had Payback, which was talked about. But then on top of that, there was also Gummy Bears, which was that MOBA Smash type fighting game, which is now still a thing that's gone to Sony. But then on top of that, we had Matter, which was cancelled. Was it last year or 2022? Apparently that was completely shut down. But yeah. Matter was, you know,
I heard Matter was canceled as early as into 2020, beginning of 2021.
We just saw the image and Bungie registered the trademark of Matter, but they shut that down. But then on top of that, we also had, what else was it? They had some kind of
a Tencent mobile game.
Yeah, a mobile game, which was I believe a Destiny mobile game. I think it was NetEase.
Yes, it would have been with NetEase or something along those lines.
And then,
with one of the large Chinese firms that invests in a lot of gaming IP.
Yeah, but mobile games, that's obviously another market. I believe that was Destiny themed. But then on top of that, there was also, I believe it was Jason or Paul Tassi that mentioned there was a PvP game, which was like a 3v3 Crucible Trials type game. And I guess that's where all their PvP resources would have gone, because obviously Destiny 2 still has PvP, but is obviously not the focus. Marathon is technically, you know, it's, how would you describe it? It's PvEVP.
It's an extraction shooter. It really depends how you do an extraction shooter.
Yeah.
But it's either purely PvP in that format, or alternatively it can be PvP and with a PvE element stashed in there too.
But Payback,
it's a format dependent thing, I believe.
Payback, it sounds like wouldn't have had any PvP, but they were also working on, you know, that mobile game, and that's what, like, is it 5 or 6 different projects, and now.
Yes, hero based. So it's gonna be, I mean, and honestly, the past 2 extraction shooters that we've played with, we've been dabbling in extraction shooters. One was Hunt Showdown, the other one was Delta Hawk 2. And the thing about both of those games is that you choose a hero with a set of abilities, and then you spec out those characters, right? The thing about extraction shooters, when you go in and you die, you lose everything. That's the whole point of them, right? They're high risk, high reward. You know, you go in, you could have the best loadout, but if a teammate goes AFK and you die, there goes all of your gear.
Almost all of them are no longer, except for Gummy Bears, which is with Sony. And also there was emphasis on, apparently internally at Bungie, they had realized that their audience skews too old, and they wanted to capture a younger audience. And having an older audience is, in a lot of ways, a very good thing, because they're a lot more dedicated and a lot more stable. Like, a younger audience can be more fickle.
Dude, yeah.
When something else comes out.
Oh my God, took the words right out of my mouth. Look, he's right. Unknown is right. Younger audiences are more fickle, man. They'll run off and go play. I see my son all the time. He picks up a new game all the time. Whereas the older folks, us, we marry up, man. We're with you forever.
They'll just like hop onto that train. But yeah, I can definitely see that. Destiny does skew older for sure. Like, the kind of people, you know, puzzles and, you know, having 6-person raids, it's definitely skews to an older audience. But I guess older audiences, I mean, in some ways they do spend, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert in marketing, I've never worked for one of these companies, but, you know, in some ways I'm pretty sure they spend a lot more money because they have more disposable income. But I think kids
Exactly.
would want to spend more money, I guess, and, you know, just like Fortnite and Minecraft.
I don't, you know, Bungie's saying like, or, you know, was it Bungie that said that they're concerned that there's not enough young people playing their game? Dude, I don't know, man. Maybe kids are just different these days. When I was a kid, I never thought about dropping money on a video game outside of RuneScape, which did cost $5 a month.
They're just, well, I don't know how much Minecraft monetizes on skins and stuff, but Fortnite for sure.
Oh god, yeah, no.
You know, buying skins and stuff. So they wanted to skew to a younger audience, which is interesting. But
it's a real question, because we speak from this as the perspective of YouTubers, right? So what we know is that the advertising dollars that are most valuable as far as YouTube monetization is concerned, I believe, is something along the lines of the like 18 to 26, 18 to 29 kind of market, because it's people who are in their prime. And like, yes, you do also get big dollars for something like 30 to 45, but it's purely because of the fact that those are the two age groups where you're working consistently and where you're more likely to be economically active.
Yeah.
That's why advertisers go after those groups. It's because they have money. As far as marketing to younger players or kids is concerned, not sure, but I think it's potentially a volume thing over like an actual consistency of purchase thing.
I think so.
Because, you know, imagine that it is a case of like, oh, you know, maybe you have 1 in every 20 people is a whale in that like 18 to 45 group, right? But if it's every single kid asking their parent, can I buy this skin? And if 1 in 10 of them agrees, suddenly, you know, you're sitting there and looking at a volume thing, right? It's more money in that respect. I don't know quite how that works out, but regardless, it's catching another part of a demographic that you need in order to make money. I mean, take a look at the obvious success of things. I mean, just to name 3 franchises that have gone after this particular group of consumers. Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft. Easy. Like, huge games with enormous degrees of success, and all of them have gone after that target market with everything from their gameplay to the kind of skins they'll throw out there to even the graphical style being more cartoony. You know, like, it's very clear this is where the money is. So, you know, regardless of why or how, it's pretty clear that's what's going on.
Yeah. And then of course we've got Marathon, which according to Bungie is the next big thing. It's what, you know, the same way that they said Final Shape is the big thing on the horizon that we need to focus on, that's gonna, you know, save Bungie. Marathon is now that thing, which apparently is still on track to be launching in 2025, which is, you know, quite soon, and we haven't heard much about it. We just got what, one.
Well, again, Jason also mentioned that there's concerns that Marathon may not even launch in 2025, but we'll see.
Trailer and one Vidoc, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know when that would come out. Maybe if whether it's a spring next year or whether it's a fall next year. I would probably imagine fall, but I'm curious to know how that's going. We did hear reports a while ago that it wasn't too good, and a lot of extraction shooter fans weren't like too impressed by it. But then apparently it's had quite an overhaul. I think that was when they replaced the game director of it. But apparently I've been hearing it's been doing better, but it's still a complete gamble, and it's still a completely different game. It's not Destiny, it's an extraction shooter. So Destiny players, no matter how good it is, they aren't gonna be interested. There's also the potential upside of creating a whole new audience. So Marathon is a complete gamble. It's quite a sore spot for Destiny fans, because a lot of Destiny fans see it as the thing that's kind of taken away from Destiny and is in the way of a Destiny 3 being made. But and then as far as Destiny 3, Bungie have said that, simply put, it was too big a risk, so there is no plans for a Destiny 3 at the moment.
What the? How is that a risk? Okay, a game called Gummy Bears. That's not risky? Hi, we're gonna make a MOBA. We have 0 experience in making MOBAs. That's not risky?
But I don't know. It's
such a there's a big cognitive dissonance moment there, if I may.
For sure.
Which is the idea of Destiny 3 is too risky. In a vacuum, I can absolutely understand that statement being true.
Yeah.
Right?
It's just
but
hard
then
to understand.
if it is too much of a risk and you already have something that works, I can then understand slowly spinning out other projects and making new IPs and making sure they're good and solid, so that you can start spreading the foundations of yourself as a publisher before then taking that big risk on a D3. But why 5 different incubation projects?
About to say that. I was literally about to say, but why 5 of them? Like one or two, but like 5? I was literally about to say that exact sentence. Like 5?
Making this one big bet on the roulette wheel is too risky. So instead, I'm going to put, $40. Sorry, instead of putting $200 on one number on the roulette wheel, I'm going to put $40 on 5 different numbers and make sure that at least one of those wins. Hopefully, maybe. I don't know. It's so silly. And obviously that might be an apples to oranges comparison, because making a massive AAA game and a sequel to that, as far as the franchise is concerned, maybe there are different risks concerned with that. But also, I don't know if it's necessarily an apples to orange thing when you look at that number of franchises being incubated. I mean, you were essentially trying to go from... you were trying to go from studio that made one IP to the next Blizzard. Yeah. You were trying to go from just making World of Warcraft.
I said it a long time ago. Bungie, they wanted to be Blizzard. They saw what Blizzard was doing. They wanted to be Blizzard. They wanted that arsenal of games under their belt.
To making World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, and something else on mobile. Diablo Immortal. Sure, whatever. We'll throw that in there for the sake of being angry. But it's total cognitive dissonance in my mind. How can you sit there and say one thing was too risky and then also decide to take another equally massive risk? It's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, and then as far as some other things, this is from Paul Tassi. He said that in general, Bungie devs don't trust the leadership, because they were pretty much told to put their order into final shape, and they did, and it was good. But the fact that that still wasn't enough, I can imagine, is what's just a bit disheartening. When
I will say, we don't know the numbers. Here's the thing. Let me also just mention this, and this is not me giving Bungie an out, but in retrospect, we're all geniuses, and we're like, dude, this is where you fucked up. You fucked up here, there. Look, imagine in a world where Lightfall didn't bomb, Final Shape came out when it was supposed to come out, Marathon came out when it was supposed to come out, and that these games, and then that Marathon was also received well. Imagine if the bet had actually paid off. The thing about taking risk, that's the thing, man. There's an upside and obviously the downside. We're in the narrative, we're in the reality of the downside.
When you can deliver something as good as Final Shape and it still isn't enough, it's just kind of like, well, what's the point? And now they're being told that next thing is Marathon, to do the same thing for Marathon. And again, it could even be great. And then who knows, they might run into some other issues. But they also said that Bungie is tied to games as a service pretty much indefinitely, and they can't really afford to do single player experiences. Matter was not a live service experience, and that was still axed as well. And then there's loads of departments that have been gutted. Most of QA is outsourced to people unfamiliar with the game, apparently, for Destiny 2 this is. So QA apparently is not, but he said almost all the departments have been...
and the narrative team were also hit pretty hard.
Yeah, the narrative team. Yeah. And then... Yeah.
I mean, dude, there's got to be just, everybody's going to just say like the generic, like, oh, it's leadership, right? But obviously there is a foundational issue with too much spending. Like if you're at a point as a studio where you go, we can't even make a single player game because the overhead for making that single player game wouldn't, or the revenue that we get from that wouldn't cover the overhead for that single player game. That's fucking crazy.
And then they also said that the updating the game is very hard because apparently it's quite bloated, and they might potentially need to vault more content in the future. Maybe they'll have to vault expansions, which is an unknown at this point because the game might grow too large. So apparently just updating Destiny 2 is becoming quite difficult, and the game is getting quite bloated again, which is something we've heard of before. But yeah, it's just a very, very strange scenario for Bungie.
I think it's also worth noting as well, when you take a look at Destiny...
I guarantee you there will be another massive layoff in the next 6 months. I hope not. What are the chances? Okay, let me ask y'all. let me ask y'all this. What is more likely? Another huge wave of layoffs or Marathon being absorbed by Sony, leaving Bungie completely focused on Destiny? So selfishly, and look, I know some of the guys that are working on Marathon. I have complete respect for them. They are talented developers. I think that if Marathon is just, if it's dragging Destiny down to, then at that point, it would be better to kind of do what Gummy Bears is doing. Again, we'll have to see how Gummy Bears is going, but it would be good to essentially send Marathon and that team be absorbed by SIE, and then Bungie consolidates and completely focuses on Destiny.
As a product all on its own, and what has been lost, there is still a salient point to be made that whilst we have just seen an enormous amount of talent leave the game, talent that inevitably is going to, we're going to feel the loss of. I mean, you know, over the last year, just sitting there and talking about the narrative team alone, just one person from that team, Robert Brooks, you know, I pick him up as the prime example of this because he's been doing this now for 5 years. He had his first piece of impact on Season of the Hunt with starting Crow's story, and he helped navigate that to what it was in final shape through all of the seasonal content releases, and also made a bunch of big impacts on different expansions and different parts of the game, created narratives that have woven themselves through the last 5 years. I talk about this because it's my wheelhouse, but we have let go of some top tier talent, and the game will inevitably suffer in the future because of that. It's not to say that there aren't still talented developers, and for what it's worth, you know, I've heard internally that the narrative team itself is still confident of what's going to happen in the future and is confident that the story will be good and that they have a handle on things, even with the layoffs, which are crushing. But it's still one of those moments where you sit there and you can't help but think of the world where all of this had somehow magically panned out and no one had to lose their jobs, you know, where we were sitting here and instead of discussing a massive round of layoffs, instead we were discussing, you know, Bungie's latest reveal event where they showed off another early look at Marathon, an early look at Payback, and a bunch of other nonsense to do with whatever else is coming down the line.
My bad, that man.
You know, obviously that never happened, but I can't help but think of the things that we will lose as a result from this. It's crushing to know that developers who've made some amazing things are gone, and for the more identifiable and the more easily understandable example, take a look at music. You know, we will never hear another track from Michael Salvatore in a Bungie game unless he's somehow magically rehired.
Yeah.
And that is painful. You know, if you look at all of the old stuff that we've gotten, even since back in the Halo days, since the early days of Destiny, since all of the times that we've had since then, some iconic music has come out of this. You know, losing that talent hurts.
Yeah,
I'll simply put it at that.
And I think we even mentioned it around the time of the last layoffs, is the fact that they were able to let go of him tells you that they don't need that kind of music, which is kind of sad in itself. The fact that they aren't going to be making anything that requires a big epic soundtrack and that it's all just going to be kind of smaller piece of content. The fact that they aren't making anything that's going to justify having such a legendary composer, and it kind of speaks to the scale of what we can expect in the future. I think...
What if they just AI everything? Oh god, that sounds terrible.
I mean, I don't want it to happen, obviously, but I feel like I can imagine a time in the future where Sony just takes over Bungie, because we did see from Jason Schreier a while ago, he did say that he revealed pretty much the terms of the agreement between Bungie and Sony, and Bungie's or Sony's purchase of Bungie, that if Bungie misses certain revenue goals or targets, that Sony can acquire and fully take over the company, which, you know, taking another 155 employees, or wasn't really taking, it was more like saving. That's kind of a part of it, but I can definitely, as much as I don't want it to happen, I can definitely foresee, you know, as far as Bungie putting in money, I can imagine Bungie's revenue is gonna shrink. So I can, at least they do have the safety net of Sony, because they did say that the only other option of being acquired by Sony would have been insolvency, because they were losing money and they were in debt. So they do have the safety net of at least Sony, but of course I'm sure that will come with some other layoffs, and I'm sure employees having to work on just other things at Sony which aren't Destiny or Bungie related. But it definitely does seem like there'll be a future where Sony just ends up taking over the whole company, and then who knows? I mean, Sony obviously they have good intentions and they can make great games, and they will.
I think so too. Yeah, I think Sony does have good intentions.
But what that means for Bungie's unique identity and what they want,
that's true,
would probably be even more diminished.
But here's the thing. I mean, the people steering the ship at Bungie right now, I don't know if the developer, I mean, we'll see how the gummy bear situation works out. But it may become a situation where those 150, 155 people that went to Sony are actually doing better under Sony's leadership than when they were under Bungie. You know, that's something to keep in mind.
If Sony ends up taking over.
I think there's a very weird part to it as well, right? Because Bungie's acquisition has another story inside of it, which was the potential pivot in direction that Sony could have taken and backed away from when they realized what they were doing, thankfully. And it's all about the story of live services taking over the world, right? Bungie's acquisition from Sony is partly because of the IP they were working on, partly because of Destiny, partly because of Marathon, but it was also because of the idea that they were one of the leading live service developers in the world, right? Destiny crowds out other things. They, you know, just in the same way that people referred to WoW killers, they refer to a Destiny killer. And lots of the time, as predicted, Destiny killers are the ones that die. As a result, Sony acquired Bungie and sent them and their devs with some expertise along to other studios who they were trying to force to make live service games as well, so that they could critique them, right? And this results in a whole bunch of stuff like the Naughty Dog story, right? Which is commonly taken out of context for a whole bunch of different reasons. But essentially it was saying like, hey, are we doing a live service game correctly? Forget about anything else. Is it going to resonate? Is it going to hold players? And the answer commonly in a lot of instances was no. Sony quickly reevaluated that strategy after, I'd say, I can't remember whether it was 6 months or a year, and they realized that live services were way crowded out and that essentially the market was already going to be in this place where it was fully saturated, and that if they just announced all these live service games, they would flop. So
that's my concern with extraction shooters in Marathon. You know, I mean, we played Delta here recently. Hunt Showdown is getting a huge update on the 15th of August. You know, and then there's a number of other extraction shooters. Like I watched a whole video the other day of 10 extraction shooters that will be coming out just in the next year alone. And that's not even counting the big ones like Tarkov and others. So I think Tarkov is the main big one, right? But the point is like that market is extremely saturated.
So they canceled a ton of live service projects, right? And that was, I'd say, last year or so that really started happening. And as a result, looking at the live service side of things with Sony, it gives me an interesting question about what their direction is with future projects in Destiny, because obviously Bungie is now tied to games as a service and live service. It's also one of those weird moments where if Sony has saved the 150 employees and pulled them into Sony Interactive Entertainment for other things, and if they're now looking at Bungie and what they might be able to do, is it possible that instead they do something which is a little bit like the old school Sony of back in the era of the earlier PlayStation 5 launches and of PlayStation 4, where they just focused on single player games that were rightly considered bangers? And like, granted, that's a perilous path all on its own, because those things are expensive. Like, I don't remember exactly what the exact tagline cost of the latest Horizon game was, but it was not cheap. Latest Spider-Man game, also not cheap. And they sell like hotcakes. Like, they always have bangers, but it's also one of those things of each one comes with an amount of risk. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing now, because I also don't exactly know what Sony's direction is now that they've abandoned the live service path. You know, they were looking for a more sustainable revenue model, but they realized live services are already saturated. So what happens now? My hope is that they can sit there and they can pull Bungie over to a better path. But honestly, regardless of what happens, there's one unifying point I think we can all sit there and hope for, which is that if Sony does ever eventually take over Bungie, let's shepherd Pete Parsons off that stage and just make sure that he's not a part of this anymore. And I say Pete Parsons, he's the figurehead of all this. It's right that he gets a certain degree of blame as CEO.
It is his job.
But But it's more than just him. It's the whole Bungie leadership team. It's the executives that are not in touch with the day-to-day developers. And I'm not talking about individuals such as the head of the narrative team or the, composition lead on the audio side of things, or even the creative directors. No, I'm talking about C-suites. They are not actually helping the process. They're making these big risks that don't pay off. They're taking terrible decisions for company morale in the long run. They're managing the studio terribly. And if Sony is able to take the wheel, the hope is for some, regardless of what the truth of the matter ends up being, for good or ill, the hope is that a new set of hands will actually be able to manage things much better,
Yeah, I mean, it is their job. Obviously, people like mainly Pete Parsons, he's been the main figurehead of a lot of the just distaste in what's going on with Bungie, but it is, his job. And obviously, like, personal attacks and that kind of, the internet can get a bit vicious, but that is a CEO's job. Like, CEOs get paid a ton of money, not just because it's just a fancy made up title, but because they do take the risk. It's their job to make the decisions, and if the decisions are bad, well, decisions, or in other words, like gambles and bets, which is their job, and most of the time,
regardless of what the truth of the matter ends up being, for good or ill, the hope is that a new set of hands will actually be able to manage things much better,
Yeah, I mean, it is their job. Obviously, people like mainly Pete Parsons, he's been the main figurehead of a lot of the just distaste in what's going on with Bungie, but it is, his job. And obviously, like, personal attacks and that kind of, the internet can get a bit vicious, but that is a CEO's job. Like, CEOs get paid a ton of money, not just because it's just a fancy made up title, but because they do take the risk. It's their job to make the decisions, and if the decisions are bad, well, decisions, or in other words, like gambles and bets, which is their job, and most of the time in a lot of companies it can pay off. When they don't go well, then they do get the blame. That's why they're paid so much money, is because you're supposed to be the one making the decisions that leads the whole ship in a good direction. So if the ship crashes into an iceberg, we're going to blame the captain. So that is kind of the downside of being a CEO. Like, yeah, obviously you get paid loads of money, and apparently he's buying loads of cars and stuff, but the downside is if when things go wrong, you are going to get the blame, which is definitely happening. And I mean, as far as we've talked about everything else Bungie is doing, the other games, but as far as Destiny 2, what we know about Destiny 2 is its future. Obviously, no Destiny 3, no more Destiny spin-offs, but Destiny 2, we have Frontiers, which we've got the 2 more episodes, but then after that we have Frontiers, which we didn't know really what it was, but now we have a bit more information. And according to Jason Schreier, he has said that essentially they're going to be content packs, smaller than expansions, smaller than like big expansions like Witch Queen, Final Shape, Lightfall, but they're going to be less investment, but they are going to have new destinations, so new planets, new raids, which is exciting, campaigns, but it's going to be on a smaller scale, similar to Shadowkeep apparently. But it's just not going to be in the exact same format. But I mean, Shadowkeep, as we've said, like, Shadowkeep was decent. Obviously wasn't what was just before, was it Forsaken that just came before Shadowkeep?
Yeah, Forsaken, then Shadowkeep,
yeah,
which was a big deal with that particular step downwards, but
still
it was also, people gave that a free pass, I think, because it was Bungie basically coming off the back of their independence, and everyone, I think, sat with the narrative of, they're our team, they're our company, we need to give them time to figure all of the stuff out internally.
Yep.
But, more Shadowkeep.
We gave them that grace period. Everybody was like, this is their first thing on their own. Everybody just chill out, let them do their thing, and let's see if this continues to get better.
Size, contents, but not the same format. They also said they want to have more replayable activities like the Coil, which was very successful. And then Frontiers is going to be... They're going to have something of those Shadowkeep size expansions apparently once a year, and then 6 months into the year they're going to have it into the light sized release, which I guess will be free. Maybe it'll be free, maybe it'll be heavy Eververse tie-ins, but that is, from what we've heard, the plan is one Frontiers type thing a year. I'm not sure if they're still going to do episodes. I believe so. I mean, I can't imagine they'd get rid of that format, even though it's obviously very dated because it is the same thing as seasons. I can imagine episodes will persist, and then we'll have one Shadowkeep sized thing, but not same format size thing every year, which this first one is going to be Frontiers, which from what we've seen and what we all kind of know, the gist is going to be outside the solar system, which would explain the new worlds. So obviously there are no more new worlds in the solar system. I think we've been to almost every planet and moon there is. So outside the system. And of course we saw the cinematic with Saint 14 and Osiris about one day they want to leave the system. That was all very obviously suggesting that we're going to leave the system, find new worlds, and it will be more of an exploration, new golden age type Exodus type situation. But you know, that would be good, but obviously it's not going to have the same theme of this big light versus dark saga with the main witness villain. But expansions seem to be no more for the foreseeable future. And they also said that expansion sales had been declining year over year, and even the final shape, as good as it was content wise, apparently it didn't even sell all that much, and it still was in a decline. So Bungie have come to the conclusion that expansions as a whole for Destiny 2 aren't profitable, so they need to do smaller things, but I guess just more, not more content, but more content than would be in a season, but not as big an expensive investment as an expansion. But that was kind of a bit concerning, but not too surprising that expansions apparently aren't profitable for Bungie, and they have no interest in doing expansions anymore.
I'm gonna throw some things out there because I think that there's some context that should also be noted on this front of things. Destiny for a very long time has been one of those games where you sit there and you're like, oh, I'm a fan of Destiny, and it draws question marks from the rest of the gaming community. Because the stories about what Bungie has done to their game, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there, it's to do with the decisions made by management, more often than not, the Bungie leadership team, because you know that all of those decisions internally are being thrown up to the higher offices, and they're the ones making them. That is the reason why people stay away, you know, whether it's to do with the fact that for the longest time the new player experience has been left in the doldrums, which thankfully that was one of the points where they're talking about potentially looking into trying to get new blood into the game and revamping that, or whether it's just the decisions around monetization, or the decisions about sunsetting content that people have paid for, or the
sentiment turned when Bungie first introduced sunsetting into the game. I think that sentiment around Bungie probably peaked when they went independent. Everybody got behind the narrative. Shadowkeep was free to play, or they introduced free to play, free to try, and everybody was like on board with okay, Destiny's going to be their own thing now. They're doing their own thing. We like it. They're no longer with Activision. Let's see what they're going to cook. But then sunsetting hit, and there's just no way. There was no way you could justify it. Like, I know all the technical limitations that Destiny was being faced with, but to a consumer, if you just say, hey, we're gonna give you a game and the content is gonna rotate out every 16 months or so, and old content's gonna be cut out of the game, they're gonna be like, what the
idea that you should be stopped from way back in the day when Destiny 2 released, getting XP at the same rate when you start the game, you know, like the whole XP throttling controversy. Things like this have added up, and you take that in combination with Lightfall, which very clearly seemed to be not just a miss on the narrative side of things, but also appeared to be Bungie trying to cram an extra expansion cycle into things with the Light and Dark saga. Oh man, to put it really simply, I think a lot of the decisions in knockoffs still fall back to management. You know, it's frustrating because you have a game that's in its long life cycle that ultimately, through a whole mix of different problems, has not been able to keep new players coming in and has not been able to retain its old players, you know? And the fact that all of these decisions feel like they fall back to management is still so frustrating.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it, you know? Destiny's expansions don't sell that well. Well, guess what? I hate to break it to them, but there is a common thread when it comes to those things, and it's not a bad narrative, it's not bad press alone, it's not a poor new player experience. Like, all of these things are contributors, but there is one central thing that has ensured that all of them stay in the manner they are, you know? I mean, even the PvP side of things, right? Developers being pulled away from Destiny's PvP to work on Marathon or to work on this incubation project that was meant to be like a 3v3 version of Trials. Like, yeah, this is totally the reason why Destiny is not selling more year on year, because you gutted the teams internally, because you're not focusing on that. You know, if the 1,300 people had been working only on Payback, Marathon, and predominantly on Destiny, or maybe just on Marathon and Destiny, I think we'd have a very different story right now. You know, they'd have the resources to allocate to things that are player priorities. They'd be able to actually focus on getting new players in. It's, you know, it could be a simplistic way to look at it, but again, I can't help but feel like that all goes back to management.
Yeah, I think...
As for...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, as for the actual content delivery of things and the way that new expansions, or I suppose the new content update system works and how that's going to be received by the community, it's clear that things are going to push towards more of a decline, but I also think that realistically when we look at it, it's not as bad as what we'd initially anticipated, right? Because ultimately, if we are looking at a Shadowkeep-sized expansion every year, and I'm still going to call it expansion because it has the key components of it, you know, a campaign, a raid, a new destination, new activities that have longevity, like, those are some important bits and pieces to it. If you have that and then a free update every year, as long as everything that you get is quality, and as long as Bungie is able to keep things fresh, I don't think the future is as terrible as things seem like they'll be. You know, there's a lot of hyperbole in the gaming community of this game is dead game, right? And it's not a thing of dying, it's not a game of languishing, it's instantly dead game, right? And we're very, very quick to jump to that point. It's uncontestable, I think, at this point, that Destiny is in a bad state, but I don't think that means that it is dead, because there are still unique things that Destiny offers. There are not as many live service games that offer the narrative experience that Destiny does in quite the same manner that it does. There is still not a live service game that offers this good of a first...
Here we go! Heads in takeoff mode! Let's fly!
...person shooter experience, and this much of a in-depth build crafting system that plays in time with that fast action. Yes, I know the constant comparisons are going to be First Descendant and Warframe, but the systems are fundamentally different. You know, Destiny's is a lot more about the individual abilities that you have and how they interact together. Warframe is all about stat building and making sure you push past crazy limits, right? So it's fundamentally different, and there still isn't something that fills that hole in the market gameplay-wise and narrative-wise. So for the time being, Destiny isn't going anywhere. People will still play this game. They don't feel like they have a home in every other game out there universally. Some people will gravitate to First Descendant, some people will gravitate to Warframe.
Those games just don't do it for me, man. They just don't scratch it for me, guys.
But it's not gonna be everyone's cup of tea because people play Destiny for other reasons than that. But yeah, decline, not death is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we've seen the saying about like how back against the wall Bungie is the best Bungie. When Bungie is in a situation, they always do seem to, you know, come off better in the end. Obviously the only difference now is that there isn't a big thing on the horizon, which I think is the most concerning thing. The reason why a lot of people feel a little bit just kind of lost with Destiny at the moment is because for the last 10 years, since 2014, there has always been something around the corner. Even if we didn't know it, it's always been a couple months away, 6 months at max from being announced. There's always been a thing on the horizon.
That big
even
bad.
in the past, most recently, more importantly, there has always been, you know, straight after Shadowkeep, there was Beyond Light, Witch Queen, and then Lightfall, and then they obviously split Lightfall into Lightfall and Final Shape. But there was always a big thing on the horizon. And even as bad as the layoffs and the very bad situation towards the end of last year, there was still the question of, okay, Final Shape, how is that going to be? And we all had, I think, a lot of confidence that it would be good because we knew that Bungie needed it to be good. Obviously, it's very disappointing that as good as it was, which was very, very, very good, this still happened, which is kind of crazy to imagine. The only difference now is that we just have no idea, even if it's you know, something about which is quite nebulous as Frontiers, there isn't oh yeah, well there's the big thing happening next year or whenever. And I think more importantly for just the casual observer or fan of Destiny, I think it's very hard for them to understand what's coming in the future. Because if you try and explain it to a very casual like fan, then it's hard to kind of explain like, oh well, there's Frontiers, which is kind of like a thing. It's kind of expansion, but kind of not expansion. It's kind of, you know, it's there. It's something good to look forward to. It's Frontiers. I feel like I feel like Destiny always needs those big drops for players to look forward to, and without that, I think that's what caused a lot of the drop off and a lot of the players not having much of an investment in the game's future, and especially story wise. If people don't really know, I'm sure they'll explain it, but if they don't have a big threat, a big villain, a witness, a Savathun, it's kind of hard to really be invested in the story, because, you know, Final Shape very successfully paid off.
I'm here to save the world, but from what? Right?
Yeah.
Like, that kind of is what it ends up feeling like.
Yeah.
I have to completely agree with what you said. You're completely correct. Like, they need these big tentpole moments, as Datto put it, to really get people back into the franchise, and that's what expansions were. And yeah, sure, the data tells us that it sold less, but that's not on account of the fact that it wasn't gonna bring people back for the sake of it being a big expansion. That is purely on the basis of terrible management decisions and them repelling people from the game, either as new players, where the game was impenetrable, or as old players who thought, okay, my time with Destiny is now done at the end of this 10-year saga, or as players who were just disgusted with the way that they treated their own developers or monetization within the game. So, you know, it would be simplifying it to say that that's the whole picture, but yeah, I can't disagree with anything you've said here. Yeah, I'm fully frustrated. Again, I'll bring it back to that dev thing, I'm sure, one more time, and how this is all leadership's fault, but I'm just gonna keep railing that point home, because I really do think it needs to be reinforced.
Yeah.
It is the only other thing I think I'll say too. I know we're trying to sit there and talk more about Destiny's side of things, but with regards to the layoffs, leadership sat there and thought that it went, quote, relatively well, according to the reporting from Paul Tassi.
What went well? Like the laying off?
This week's worth of news and the way that things went. They think that Pete Parsons having his picture continuously replaced with bad Photoshop drawings where people are adding things like clown makeup to his face on Destiny's wiki, they think that that went well. And I don't know how else to put it. It's just...
I don't know.
It's the Principal Skinner meme. Is like, are the kids wrong? And am I out of touch? You know,
Yeah.
like... yeah.
I mean, if that's...
No, the kids are wrong.
I'm not sure about that one. I mean, you know. But I mean, talking about Final Shape
yes.
was just such success, which is why this is all just like crazy, almost whiplash. The fact that we can have such a good expansion and then just go straight into just yanked back by this. I mean, Final Shape, critically, like what Metacritic and OpenCritic, like some of the highest scores ever by critics, by general fans, by casual fans. It's just been unanimously a huge success. I mean, where would you rank it as far as all Destiny expansions? I guess obviously the bar
#1
would be, in the olden days, Taken King, but more recently Forsaken and Witch Queen. Those are all seen as the greats of Destiny, but where would you personally rank Final Shape among those?
Unquestionably, it's #1. I mean, this is the thing that you've got to remember, is it's easier to sit there and say that for me, because I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who has actually been there for the 10-year journey. But the emotion and the actual feeling within the Final Shape, the core heart of it, was actually so tangible and so real. And it felt like it was the kind of Destiny that I've wanted to play for years. I mean, you had the thing of Cade being brought back, which could have been an enormous risk, because they could have done a terrible job with it.
Yeah,
but it was
I thought they
probably
were.
one of the best ways to bring back a former hero and to sort of momentarily cheat death that I've seen in video games.
Yeah,
you know?
very well done.
They paid it. Yeah, they paid it with respect. They didn't make it cheap. They didn't ignore everything that had happened before. They put it in the right context.
Yeah.
And that's just one aspect of it, right? But for that risk that they took, which they managed well, they got the amazing payoff of that one scene when everyone is reunited, and wordlessly, you know, you just have Zavala walking up to Cade and saying, I don't know if this is really you, and then just falling into an embrace with him. And it's just, dude, you don't get storytelling like that all the time. You know, you see that very rarely when you have a moment of truly raw emotion like that that's been built to properly in the story and is delivered brilliantly. The Final Shape was full of moments like this. And then there's all the other small bits and pieces to it. It's telling that it's fantastic and that it resonated with people. But I just wanted to go ahead and give a comparison, right? Baldur's Gate 3, which is widely considered now to be one of the greatest games of all time, PC Gamer gave that a 97 in their review, and this was the undisputed game of the year in a really crowded game year in 2023.
It's tough, man. It was tough.
There were some fantastic releases during that time. It was a new Zelda game that came out that everyone was loving with Tears of the Kingdom. You had some other individual AAA releases that were incredible. You had a new Final Fantasy. There were so many games that year that contested that top spot. And then BG3 sweeps in. And there's a good reason that I bring this up, because 97 for Baldur's Gate 3, for Final Shape it was 92. So like, and this obviously is all out of 100, but PC Gamer does not give scores like that on a regular basis. And the Metacritic score for the Final Shape within the first week or month or 2 weeks, something within that opening window, was at 94 out of 100 on Metacritic, which tells you things. This was genuinely a cut above anything that Bungie has made in the past. Like, it might be the highest rated game that Bungie has made since some of the old Halos.
Yep.
I can't remember. I don't know what they would have gotten back in the day, but it was certainly...
Or, you know, hold on, this is how fickle the community is. Everyone bombed the shit out of Halo Reach when it first came out. Y'all remember that? Everybody was like, this is shit, this is ass, this isn't Halo. But Reach was the best. It was. And look, I love 3, but Reach was the best.
Throwing 9s and 10s at Halo 3 when it released. And I think it just goes to show, critically speaking, this was an undisputed success. Fans loved it, you know? There was one hiccup to it from everything, which stopped, server launch. And that lasted for about, what, 8 hours, I think, in total? And then everything started to subside. It just goes to show, like, this was the magnum opus of Destiny. This is the best expansion that's been released, and I don't think anyone can really dispute that.
No, I don't think it was just it was nice, refreshing, but also just kind of a bit just strange just to see almost no just criticism and no one really, like, even people who just don't even play the game, everyone was just unanimously just saying, like, this is just a masterpiece of an expansion. And it was just so well done, and just everything about it, like, I feel like it's just good to see that Bungie was still capable of that. But you know, the story, the campaign, the cutscenes were incredible. The general mood of it, the Zavala's plotline, he was a little bit annoying at times, I would admit, but Zavala's just, his whole story arc was just so well done. And Cade, as you said, Cade was very well done. What were your thoughts on, did you see the alternate ending that came out?
Yes, where you use both light and dark to resurrect your ghost.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on
being
that?
The planned.
Do you think that would have been, what would you thought of that has been an ending? How do you compare that to...
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
I actually do prefer the Cade ending, and the reason being is because that it actually... The ending that we actually got. Right. The reason I say that is because Cade as a character could have just stuck around, and it wouldn't have had the same effect as a character like Saint 14. It would have been one of these things of, well, you resurrected him, so now I guess you get to use him in marketing again. Cool for Nathan Fillion, I guess he gets another paycheck. And it's just, you know, it could have been done and it could have been made really cheap. But it gave us the closure that we'd been lacking for 5 years that helped to define the rest of the story. And it made the...
What they're talking about, I guess there was an alternate ending, guys, where our guardian at the end, when our ghost sacrificed itself, we used the light and darkness and did something there that resurrected our ghost. But the real ending that we got, spoilers, Cade sacrificed himself. And when he sacrificed himself, that's what brought our ghost back. And what Bife is saying here, which is correct, we got the proper closure. And it also means death means something in Destiny.
The rest of the story that's happened since Forsaken feel valid, right? Our entire journey with Crow was defined by the fact that we needed to get over the fact that he was not Aldrin Sov, and he hadn't been the one that pulled the trigger and killed Cade. And Cade at the end sitting there and saying those words of, no one chooses my fate but me, And then basically saying, this is my choice. I am leaving deliberately. I know I'm going to somewhere better. I know this is what I want to do. And then choosing to part from us, but giving us that incredible gift of reviving our ghost in that moment.
Yeah.
That was a brilliant way of ending his story. You know, it was him sitting there and going out on his own terms, knowing that he probably wasn't around here for a very long time, and treating a character with respect. You know, I've seen a lot of people sit there and say that's how you bring a character back, and I completely agree. Like, I think the ending is perfect as well, because it talks about the greater message of the final shape. This is very much like, high in the sky narrative stuff, but the final shape is a meditation on purpose, right? The entire point of the expansion is basically sitting there and saying, I don't believe that someone else should be able to define what your purpose in life is, or your fate should be, right? It's why that line of Guardians make their own fate is something that was referenced a lot in the marketing. It's why Cade says words to that effect just before he chooses to resurrect your ghost and return to the Traveler, you know? And it even goes back to the motive of the Witness and the actual final shape. The Witness is trying to decide the fate of everything forever, without involving any choices for any of those beings for the most part. And it's essentially sitting there and trying to remind everybody that you have the agency to choose who you are, what you want to do, and what you want to be. You should be able to define your own purpose in it. Narratively speaking, the final shape has so many points at which it touches on those notes, and it does so in a genuinely beautiful set of ways. The Cade example is just the most common one, but even Zavala, when he's sitting down in his old homestead, speaking to the statue of the calcified version of his wife, you know, it's him sitting there and saying, I know you'll understand when I have to make this choice, right? It's him sitting there and defining something and rejecting a purpose that hasn't been chosen for him, that's clearly made to tempt him. Even when you look at the dissenters, the voices within the Witness, those are individuals that are defying this majority that has become tyrannical to them. And they are saying, no, we should never have had this idea in the first place where we go out and we decide the fate of everything. We completely disagree, and we're trying actively now to depart from this thing. You know, it's seeping in the idea of what is your purpose, choose it for yourself. And they deliver on that constantly. It's a subtle undertone to the whole expansion. It delivers beautifully.
And also Sundance as well. Cade's ghost in that cutscene, she does specifically say, like, Cade's like, well, what if I want to stay here? And she says, if that's the fate that you make. Like, I thought that was one of the best. So well done, because it literally does tie into why the game is called Destiny. It's the whole theme of predetermined fate, destiny, making your own fate, someone else trying to make your fate for you, the Witness trying to impart its impression of what it thinks the perfect universe should be, and then us being like, no, we're going to make our own choice. And also the Traveler being there, sometimes kind of interjecting, you know, giving us ergo sum and, like, you know, pushing back against the final shape. It helps in some ways, but it also generally is just like, these light and dark are these just powers. You do what you want with it. The Witness is going to try and do what it wants, but also Guardians make their own fate. And that line was so well done, because it was obviously in the Vault of Glass when you get the Times Vengeance buff of Guardians make their own fate. And we saw a lot of Bungie developers saying Guardians make their own fate. It was in a lot of trailers, but the way they had that line off, and then going back to the Cade's ending and the alternate ending, it was so much better, because you said the word like cheap, and it would have been quite cheap. I saw some people making the argument of, you know, like, the Guardian is so powerful, maybe it should be able to use light and dark to do something, but having Cade make the choice to sacrifice himself,
exactly,
because the Traveler didn't want to, because the Traveler, even, you know, I said it in a video, but like, after everything that the Guardian and the Ghost has done for the Traveler, everything over 10 years, the Traveler still was just like, nope, not going to revive you. It couldn't even bend its rule once. It couldn't even, or whether it was able to, whether it wanted to, we don't know, but it still was like, nope, not going to raise your ghost. So for Cade to be like, I'm going to make a choice and say,
dude, the Traveler though. Can we just be real? Why? You know, I know it gives us the juice. It gives us the juice, but the Traveler I just don't think the Traveler really cares.
Sacrifice myself to give you a ghost back was so much more cleverly done. And made his presence more meaning because he's a temporary character and he comes and goes. And even little things like, you know, him making Crow the new Hunter Vanguard and giving him the cloak, that, you know, wouldn't have been, it's much more meaningful that Cade is gone because he actually gave a parting gift and he gave his blessing to Crow, as opposed to him, if he was just still there in the Pale Heart Tower with his arms crossed, just kind of chilling, it would have been a bit more like, oh yeah, Cade's still there, but it makes the character more significant that he's gone. So yeah, the ending we got was much better. You can see why they changed it, but also it's not like it's not like it was still in the game. Like, it was, what we saw was probably a very early cut, and it goes to show. And we did also see, and I think Jason's reporting of how they did change the story and missions and do a lot of moving around with Final Shape, and that might have been something they would have done. But yeah, definitely much more happy with the ending they got. And it was just the whole theme of Guardians Make Their Own Fate was very cleverly done.
I will hold nothing back with regards to admitting genuine, I'm not a Cade fan, so to speak. It's not like I hate the character, it's more just one of the things of like, I sit there and I'm like, oh, okay, it's pretty cool, pretty neat. I'm a warlock at heart. I don't really care too much for hunter stuff when it comes to all of that, but you know, the way that they framed that entire scene was beautiful. It genuinely brought me to tears, because it really did feel like a whole 10 years had come to a climax in that moment.
Yeah.
And I can say very few franchises where that's actually been something I've experienced. You know, the last time I think I saw something like that was Mass Effect. And, you know, that was a disappointing end to an otherwise brilliant journey across 3 games that I'd seen.
Let's be real. Most stories do, for some unknown reason, fumble the ending. They really. I mean, look at Game of Thrones.
And in the case of the Final Shape, you know, it was the most glorious ending to a journey like that. And, you know, things still continue onward. But I can't contest the fact that it was so brilliantly executed to have that be the choice.
Yeah.
Also, I do love that Sundance effectively was the stand-in voice for the Traveler, because it gave us a way of speaking directly to the quote-unquote god that we've been sort of serving this whole time with the thing of the light and whatnot, but it also kept the Traveler as an entity pretty mysterious, you know? We still have that mixture of, we learned a whole ton about the Traveler and what it is and what's going on with it and what's happened to it now, but we still don't know everything. And I think that was a really delicate line to try and sort of tiptoe through and to really hold the balance on, but they did it. And it's why I think the choice for Sundance to be there was so brilliant too. Even at the very end, where you see Sundance's shell briefly and it's just brimming with light.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what's going on there. This is something larger within that shell. There's something more going on.
But what was up with, remember that Final Shape trailer where it sounded like the Traveler's voice? Like, whatever happened to that? I didn't see anything. Was that line cut, or was it in the game? Or
no,
I want to say that was the center.
It's in the game, it's just not in any important context. And
who was
I'll
it?
say this, it was Micah 10 as it stands. Which is funny too, because it was one of those moments where it sounded like it could be the voice of the Traveler, and in a funny way, it kind of is, because she's a speaker, right?
Yeah,
she's able to interpret the dreams and visions of the Traveler. So narratively speaking, yeah, sure, it's not the Traveler directly sitting there and telling us we are the light of hope. It is, however, someone who is able to interpret the feelings and emotions of something that's way bigger than any of us. So yeah, next best thing I think on that front.
The El Heart is easily one of my favorite destinations they have ever made. Absolutely everything about it. I've never just enjoyed being on a destination so much. Just everything about the linear path I think is excellent, especially in the campaign, how you're progressing in a direction, you're not going back on yourself and you're not repeating the same areas. Like every new mission you get further and further in, and it goes from this just beautiful lush green, just colorful, vibrant area to this very just gloomy post-apocalyptic, just doomy area.
that's wrong and very surreal.
And it's just
at the
got
same time.
so many, the little puzzles and secrets, just the little chests, like little stitching chests that it will kick the ball into the area. Like they're perfectly done because they're so simple. You can kind of figure them out by yourself, but they're not too long and annoying, and they don't get boring. Like the amount of times I would just go into the blooming and then just mess around with some stuff, and even with no purpose, with no like thing to do, just being in the space was actually just fun. And overthrow as well. Overthrow is
such
excellent.
a clever idea.
The fact that you can do it solo, because the problem I've always had with all of these, I can't even remember what they were called in Neomuna and in the
just
Throne
public
World.
events.
The big event type thing where it's just like the waves, the overthrow type event, is impossible to do solo. At the highest level, because you would load into a zone and then you might get some amount of waves through, and then for the final waves, it was just simply not designed for one player to do. It's possible, I'm sure, of course it's possible, but it's just way too difficult, way too many enemies spawning, whereas overthrow is designed to be solo. And the fact that you can do it by yourself, it was so much more accessible and replayable, I thought, than any other patrol space. And just as far as just secrets and cool little Easter eggs and just random things there are around there, it was way more than I did kind of expect. Savathun's Throne World to have a lot more secrets and kind of be on the Dreadnought level, but I did think the Throne World was quite lacking. And Neomuna the same, is very empty, but we all know
Byron was pretty good.
Delightful, but the Pale Heart, as far as just secrets and depth and intricacies, I just absolutely love that destination. I think it's the best one they've ever made.
It has to also be said that Overthrow as well has a really special place in all this, and I think that's because it's geniusly designed on the basis that if you just do one little thing, and get one little chest, you know, you might do that passively on the side, and then it's like, oh well, who knows? I might get an exotic class item to drop from that on a lark, and it's like, yeah, I'm on my way to do this, why not? And then you return from doing whatever you were doing, be it assist, or be it some kind of other secret hunting, or be it going after something else, and your progress isn't gone. So you're halfway through one level of Overthrow, and you're like, I mean, I guess I could finish some of it.
Yeah, that is
and then,
exactly.
You know, you can, and lots of the objectives and the Pathfinder push you towards that central activity, and it's got a bunch of different mini events to it too, which have a decent amount of variety across all three zones in which it can be found. So like it gives you a new format for what the open worlds of Destiny can do now, and I'm really pleased with what they've done. It's the more innovative world design that really we knew Bungie could do, but we were just not necessarily seeing it out of them, and it's here now in game, and I think as a proof of concept, if they build more on this, they've got a fantastic format here. You know, like, this is better than just having a random public event every once in a while. The Pale Heart feels very alive. I think isn't the best way to put it.
And especially the fact that it's designed solo is very difficult for you to have so much fun by yourself. Like I said before, other destinations that require other players, or just like, okay, well... And
you got the power-ups too, right? You got all the different power-ups on the Pale Heart, which is really, really cool. The one where you slide and you emit flames out in a wave in front of you. Like, that's really cool. We've not seen that on other destinations.
There's no point. Even some public events, like, I'm trying to think which ones, but some of the, like, the Vex sinking the plates, like, some of them really are very difficult to do solo because you can't be in 3 places at once, no matter how good you are. And obviously you can just, like, you know, find some crazy building. It's possible, but a lot of them just simply aren't designed for one player. But this just, the fact that you can be by yourself and you feel kind of alone in this world is just absolutely love it.
Yeah. And they bridged in a bunch of awesome stuff with the narrative as well. I'll only touch on this briefly because, you know, I could witter on about it forever, but the Kvosh'Tov exotic. I struggled to say quest, but... you know, progression line, I guess, where you need to pick up all the different bits and pieces, but then also you're looking at the you're looking at the memories of the Traveler with Micah. Oh my god, such a clever idea to sit there and tie those into that quest, because it gives you some astounding revelations about the nature of the world and what's happening, you know? The fact that there is harmony between the light and dark in the Traveler, the the actual play-by-play of what the Traveler was going through when the shard of the EDZ was created and dropped off from it, and why it's all mangled and screwed up down there in the Dark Forest. These are just little bits of context here and there, but man, so much good stuff just packed in there, and brilliant. Just full stop. Love it. Everything about it is fantastic.
How would you rank the raid as far as Destiny's other raids? And what are your thoughts on the raid race? What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one. Definitely a top 3. I don't think I can contest that, you know? If it has to be really dragged around with regards to things in the narrative, maybe you sit there and look at a top 4. It's going to stand in that upper echelon for certain, compared to other raid bosses like Oryx back in the day with King's Fall OG. It definitely stands toe-to-toe with bosses like Riven and Rulk, which I think is fair to say they are now the sort of the pinnacle of raid bosses with regards to their design and the way they introduce themselves. And I still think that Vow is the best for me. I can't get over Rulk. He's just too good.
That's very high
He was
for me.
a brilliant... It's a very high bar, especially considering that Rulk was a character that was introduced only briefly. And yet left such an incredibly lasting presence on the game. And
Well, it was such a shock. I didn't know what to expect in Val. We kind of knew what to expect. We didn't know how we were gonna fight the Witness, and the 4th encounter was a complete surprise. But yeah, Val was just like, holy shit, is this real?
the entirety of the Dread faction as a whole. But man, the Salvation's Edge is still killer. I mean, from a encounter design perspective, it's kind of weird that it only has 2 bosses, but the difficulty curve of it and the things you're expected to do with it, fantastic. The actual encounters that were designed for the raid, with the exception of Encounter 3, because I think that one is kind of a bit too easy for this tier of raid, absolutely stellar, absolutely incredible. Verity, in particular, Encounter 4.
Yeah.
Wow, what a brilliant idea to sit there and have... Yeah, the most unique encounter we've seen since probably... I think the consensus is that it was Volt in Last Wish that's the last thing we've seen which is similar to this. But it's Volt on steroids.
Yeah.
And the fact that it took 11 hours for the first team to crack it, I think, that's really... I mean, that speaks for itself. This was one of the most incredible encounters to go through because it's a fusion of tough gameplay, amazing mechanics, and this absolutely brilliant narrative twist where you are literally explaining the entire story of the final shape in the most broad brush terms using shapes. And it's just mind-boggling that they made all this. And you know what's amazing? Verity apparently was the result of the delay. Like they had Verity is one of the things that was listed that they made within the delayed time window.
Okay.
Yeah, we weren't even gonna have the 4th encounter. Can you believe that? Can you imagine the final shape raid, Salvation's Edge, being 4 encounters, no 4th encounter, straight to the Witness? I couldn't imagine that.
For everything. And I can't imagine Salvation's Edge without Verity. Like, if Verity didn't exist, it would be a much less exciting raid. You know, if we just... I mean, think about that, right? Because it's clear that it's just added on quickly. You could go directly from the end of Encounter 3 all the way up to Encounter 4, and I don't think it would be anywhere near as exciting. But man...
It's a break. It gives a nice palate cleanser. And the fact it's white, can hurt your eyes a bit, but it's just a very different puzzle encounter. And just mechanics wise, how, having like killing off the Guardian and then having to try and spectate and call out ghosts and outfits, like it's easily the most unique raid encounter ever made. And just with the shapes as well, very, looks a lot more complicated than it is complicated, but it is definitely difficult to describe. I think if you watch any kind of guide or explainer of it, it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. But once you actually do it a few times, in gameplay wise, it just flows so well, and it's just such a nice and again, you also have the element of being alone in the room, which is very cleverly done. The fact that you're just, I don't think there's any other raid encounters where you're just kind of separating, you're in your own separate instance, is also very cleverly done.
That's amazing.
But I think I'm not sure where I would rank it personally, I think Riven and Rolk.
The fact that Verity even works is mind-blowing to me. You get TP to another room separated from your team. It's wild.
Then Vault of Glass, Wrath. I feel like it would be around somewhere in the middle, high middle, but middle for me. I mean, I didn't like, I thought if I can, you know, I'm going to be a backseat developer and just completely, you know, probably make a lot of, if any Bungie designers are watching, eye roll. But I do think some of the encounters were kind of duplicated. I feel like the first encounter we could do without with, because a lot of them with the bouncing back and forth with the plates, they're quite similar. This is just my personal, again, we can throw my opinion out there. Just my personal, what I would have loved to have seen would be just multiple different versions of the Witness all throughout. I feel like the Herald boss, as much as I do love the Herald encounter, I feel like I would have preferred just, even if it was like a hand of the Witness or something to do with the Witness rather than a taken captain. Like I would have loved to have seen just a raid where it's just 4 different encounters of just the Witness and you're just constantly fighting off different pieces until you finally reach the top bit and you face him like ultimately. But
we need more
I
raids.
feel like I really did enjoy the Herald encounter, which I believe the second, and the third encounter, which is the more linear path. That was very cool. But I feel like the first encounter, I guess it teaches you the mechanics, but I would have liked to see, I guess, more bosses. But then I get the idea of you want the main boss to be the Witness. You don't want to have a bunch of other distractions. But I would have liked to have seen multiple varieties of the Witness just all throughout. Just no one else. Like, this is just you against the Witness, and you're just constantly just, it's such a big enemy. It requires you to defeat it like 3 or 4 times. And then obviously his excision after that as well. But that's just my you know, nitpicking and just what
Respectfully.
what I would have liked to see. But it's still excellent raid.
I will say this is something which I need to really hash this out before true confirmation, because there have been some Bungie devs that I've heard that have said no, this isn't the case, and yet it is observable in the game that it surely is. The idea of whether or not the Witness is the whole monolith or not.
Yes.
That is, assuming that's true,
crazy.
because I'm going to go by what's observable in game, because I can't 100% confirm everything. Assuming that is correct, that is the most brilliant and wild gameplay decision with regards to the environment, and it's absolutely fantastic.
We're climbing the Witness.
The other thing I'd say as well is, here's a little rumor that I've heard, so none of this is confirmed. I heard a rumor that apparently when they were developing Root of Nightmares, they realized that the raid needed a big encounter that was just better than what they currently had, and they did not have the ability to flesh something out in that time, so they took planets from what was meant to be Salvation's Edge,
Right.
and switched it with the Encounter 3 of Root of Nightmares. In terms of structure. Now, obviously, if you look at the two of them side by side, they both look like they're parts of that respective raid. So I don't know how much credence and truth there is to that.
Maybe just the mechanics.
But yeah, just for a second, imagine what it would have been like if
Dude, hold up.
Encounter 3 had been in Root of
Oh
Nightmares had
my
been Encounter 3
God.
version that we got in
We would have
Salvation's
died.
Edge and vice versa.
Yeah.
You know, can you imagine going and having that 3-boss series where all of a sudden it's, oh, we go ahead and we do the opening encounter, and then we do Herald, and then we do Planets, and then we do Verity, and then we do Witness? What a raid. That would have been incredible. I think it would have genuinely been the toughest raid that
Dude, we would have died. It would have been 48 hours for us less.
has ever been created if that had been the format they'd gone for. But also I think it would have been something that followed up after Root of Nightmares, which would then have been probably cleared on day 1 within an hour. Because
That's true.
yeah,
That is true.
When
Had planets not existed in Root of Nightmares, man, that raid would have been done 20 minutes.
Math class got to Encounter 3 in Salvation's Edge, they cleared it first try. I mean, that's what you're looking at when it comes to these contest teams now. They're just really, really good at it.
Yeah, I mean,
I will say this. With regards to what you said about Encounter 1, I think Encounter 1 is fine. And I say that because it's got the kind of combat intensity that Encounter 3 in Vow of the Disciple has, where you're going through the relics, and you need to learn that base mechanic for it. And I'm okay with that. I do completely agree with you on the idea of the Herald of Finality. I wish there was more to it. I'd even have accepted it if it wasn't just the Herald of Finality, but instead was the last disciple or something, you know? Like, make it so that it's a known character within the backstory and lore. Maybe not super known. I know everyone thinks that it's Tanix, but I would have loved it if they'd sat there and called it Chelchis, the final disciple or something.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other theory that people have rolling around, and it's got very deep lore bases to it. They could have done a lot with that. So much awesome stuff, but yeah, either have that be something that's more meaningful to the witness, or have it actually be a part of the witness. Like, in fact, you know, my own backseat dev moment, you know, the bit in the cutscene where the Vanguard is running from the witness at the end of the campaign? Crow has that moment where he cuts the witness's hand using the iron axe. Can you imagine if that's essentially what we have to do in Counter 2, is instead of just fighting the Herald, is fighting the Herald so that you can steal a weapon the Herald has, be it a glaive or something, because the disciples have a thing for glaives, and then using that to actually cut off the weakened hand.
Yeah, like that's the kind of thing that I mean.
So
like,
many
it wouldn't,
cool things.
It wouldn't have to be just a whole separate witness, but if it's just an encounter and it was just, say, just this cloud and there's just hundreds of hands that are reaching down and you have to chop them all off, and you're kind of weakened. The theme is that you're rising through the monolith, you're chopping off these hands and you're weakening it, but just something along those lines of just where I just didn't want to see anyone else besides the witness, and I wanted to just face lots of different forms and versions, because the witness can kind of shapeshift, and it is just this weird giant structure which we can't even really understand. But yeah, the raid was, by all means, it was technically the most difficult raid ever, which is good. I wanted to see that. It deserves to be. Like, if you know, if it was as
one
easy
team
as
cleared on day one.
If it was as easy as Root of Nightmares, Nezarec, that would have been, because that was just so easy. But they did that deliberately. They wanted to. But the fact that being difficult, I think, is very satisfying. And you know, the raid race was entertaining. You had all the hiding screens and the fierce competition, which is, I mean, I kind of see why viewers are frustrated, because they're just like, obviously we're talking about during the raid race when everyone was streaming it. Most teams were hiding their screens, so literally you were just watching a black screen, sometimes not even a webcam, because they didn't want to give away the secrets of what they've understood about the mechanics, which I understand from a viewer perspective is like, this is not good content. And I understand the main argument is, why stream it if you're not going to show the content? You might as well just be offline, which, to be fair, the world's first team didn't stream, did they? They were completely offline.
They had a separate private recording that they had, and this is a thing that I've seen more and more teams do. They had a unlisted, not even known account where there were basically 0 followers of it. And that stream was for them, and it was on like a 30-second delay so that they could go back and look at their own perspectives. And that's the only reason we even have the world's first completion recording in the first place, is just that stream was going alongside the recordings that they had IRL alongside their thing. So it's just these different moments at which you can see different teams running it and then putting all this effort into hiding their screens. I hate to say that it kind of comes with the territory. I understand the bad experience for a viewer, but I'll also sit there and say that it creates a culture all unto itself. And I think that there's a hilarity to that, you know. Nowhere else can you sit there and see a world first race where it's people intensely shouting each other out about mechanics, and all you can see on screen is a bunch of weird images blocking something, and then a pair of dancing tomatoes as a part of a GIF in the center of the screen, just to make it even more confusing. And it's just,
yeah, I get
it's so silly and it's so ridiculous. I'm sure it's a terrible experience as a viewer,
like I said, I get the viewer experience, and I get the main argument of, you know, why stream it if you don't want to show it. But at the same time, this is a competition. This is a race. This is a competition of who can solve a puzzle first. So the idea of, like, if I've figured something out, I don't want to, like, you know, if it was any other kind of just competition on the scale of like this, then you wouldn't want to be giving out what you figured out. So it is a competition first. It isn't a, hey, let's stream. And there's also another element that a lot of people don't realize is there are, like, these raid teams have things called scouts, who are people who specifically watch other people's streams and go on Reddit and go in Discords and try and get information about who's figured out what. Oh, someone's
That's true, man. The best raid teams are 7-man raid teams. Sometimes 8.
got this strategy. They've tried doing the shooting this, and oh, this person's figured out this. So each of these raid teams, almost all of them, have people called scouts who are going around spying, not spying, but, just looking and observing at what's public,
exactly,
as they should. It's not, some illegal thing. It's just pretty common sense. It's a smart tactic of having people tell you, oh, this person's figured out.
I feel like scouts should be illegal, but I don't know how that would be enforced. Everybody does it, man. Everybody does it. It's one of those things you just can't stop.
This, or someone on Reddit has made a post saying this is a good strategy to do, or try this weapon. And
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Coach, not scouts. They are just coaches.
they would relay the information back to them. So all of these raid teams have people fiercely, it isn't just viewers, they're all in competition with themselves. So yeah, I get both sides. It doesn't make a good viewing experience, but it is, first and foremost, this is a competition, and there is quite a lot of mainly bragging rights, recognition. You get the raid belt, you get the glory of being cemented as the world's first team. So it's
it just goes it goes to show you 6 people get the belt at the end of the day, but don't kid yourself, right? 6 people may get the belt, but a raid team nowadays in the real competitor space where you are looking at those top teams, Math Class, Redeem, way back in the day would have been qualified here. Saltagrepo's team, the name of which is escaping me. God, how can I not remember their name? Parabellum, who was actually the world first team for Salvation's Edge. They're sitting there. They have coaches, they have scouts, they have people in between who are doing all the...
School is back, and Dick's Sporting Goods has what you need to win your year. Check backpacks off your list.
The stuff. They have their real life... consider Danielle, Dato's spouse, as a part of that too, because all the while she's there doing support stuff for day one. Like, it's
a whole operation.
It's a whole operation for all of these people, and they put a lot of dedication into it. So, like, yeah.
But yeah, that was an interesting event.
I have to say one other thing, and it leads us into another topic, I think, which is brilliantly handled. The raid dropped some fantastic lore throughout, but there was one line that absolutely blew me away when I first heard it, which is when you transition from Encounter 2 to Encounter 3, the Witness directly mentions the Widower and essentially confirms its existence. And that was a huge deal. I don't know how best to explain this to anyone other than the way that I explained it first on my video covering this momentarily, which is just that essentially the Witness confirmed that the devil is real and that it is not the devil, right? That's the most simplified version of sitting there and saying
that's fantastic.
The raid dropped some fantastic lore throughout.
What a great analogy.
There was one line that absolutely blew me away when I first heard it, which is when you transition from Encounter 2 to Encounter 3, the Witness directly mentions the Widower and essentially confirms its existence. And that was a huge deal. I don't know how best to explain this to anyone other than the way that I explained it first on my video covering this momentarily, which is just that essentially the Witness confirmed that the devil is real and that it is not the devil, right? That's the most simplified version of sitting there and saying it that I can possibly do. And that, as far as Destiny's narrative future is concerned, gave it such an important set of legs, if that makes sense. It can walk with this now. The reason I say that is as follows. For about 5 years in the lore and narrative side of things, there's been this constant sort of back and forth about, well, is the Widower actually the Witness? What are the two? Are they different? What's going on? And it caused a whole bunch of different people to sit there and point at the narrative and say, it's pretty clear this thing has not been fully planned out. Looking at things now, it seems clear that at very least the narrative team has been able to take that very delicate discussion about what this true villain at the end state of Destiny really is and what they really want. Are they the same person? Are they two separate entities? What do they represent to each other? They've taken that very delicate discussion and they've perfectly threaded the needle that they needed to. And They justified the existence of the Witness whilst not devaluing the existence of the Winnower. They made both of them distinct entities with distinct different modus operandis and agendas. They made it so that you have a ship whose lore tab was revealed well after the raid and GM Excision was launched. No, not the first knife. It's the pre-order ship, Nukre.
Okay.
I keep saying it there. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But yeah, it's a ship where it's literally the Winnower sending you a message.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant because of the fact that now they've sat there and said, you've defeated an Elder Evil of this universe. But the real thing, the equivalent of the Gardener that the Witness was always talking about, the actual thing that's at the heart of darkness in the same way that the Gardener is at the heart of the Traveler and the heart of light, that's still out there, and it's a force of the universe. It's higher than anything you've seen, other than perhaps the Traveler and the Light. And it's still out there looking on at what you're doing. And the brilliant thing about that is it's given us some further clarity and context to what might happen in future expansions, and where they might be pulling the story next as far as the next big bad is concerned. They've also made it so that they've justified the last 5 years of lore, given themselves some major stepping stones, and made it so the universe still has a big bad. If we do ever get to that point where a Destiny 3 comes along, I think they may pull the trigger and make the Winnower the big bad of that. Or alternatively, they will set things up so that a new saga begins and it ends with the Winnower being somehow conquered or defeated. And that's brilliant. Because we've sat there in the last 10 years and we've been in this cycle pushing towards the Witness, even if it took us time to really get to the point where it was clear that it was the Witness.
Mods, start banning fucks.
Yeah, the story of Destiny was not written in one cohesive fashion, like it was segmented as far as its creation was concerned. The designers have done something brilliant here. Narratively, they justified the past whilst laying the foundation for the future, and they gave us a big bad that... Wow, I don't know if you've read any of the actual written stuff that's clearly from the Winnower, but I don't know who they voice for that character, but they're brilliant. Like, they have some Dracula-level energy, where they're the kind of person who, in the same breath, will sit there and sound inviting and menacing and completely in control. And, I don't know, it feels like you're listening to Machiavelli give a speech on the nature of why you must be subjugated. It's brilliant. Like, the closest I think we'll get to that is Rolk in terms of the smarmy energy, and I love it. I can't wait to see what happens with it.
Do you think the Winnower would be like an enemy that we would want to defeat, or do you think it would be just kind of like a thing that exists as a counterpart of the Light that kind of... Do you think it can be defeated? Do you think we'd want to, or do you think maybe it would have... Because the Witness was the first knife, which kind of implies that maybe there would be others. And I was thinking of the, I think the ship is called the First Knife, which is Mara and Akora talking about, like, they're just kind of realizing, like, whoa, like, okay, so the Witness is the first knife, well, then what wields it?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, they're talking about the Winnower being this thing, but do you think there would be second knives and third knives and other things that just utilize the power and kind of are... Because the Witness even said that, you know, even the Winnower doesn't tell it what to do. It acts on its own will, but it's somewhat aligned with the Winnower. The same way that the Traveler doesn't tell the Guardians what to do. It kind of sometimes gives us a little weapon. It kind of gives us a little nudge and kind of helps, but it doesn't... Generally, Traveler doesn't intervene. And it kind of seems like the Winnower is the same with the Witness, and the Witness is just doing what it wants in its own final shape. But do you think the Winnower is a character that we would defeat, or do you think it's more of just a cosmic energy that will always exist and it maybe has more minions?
Very good questions. To answer the first side of it, I think there's a possibility, but if they are going to go down that route, they need to treat it with care, and it's why I'd sit there and say it needs to be another saga, because you would need to build towards something like that. The Winnower needs to be a villain that you treat with respect in the same way that you treat Savathun with respect. You need to build towards that, and it needs to be meaningful, right? Because they are more of a universal force. The idea that they phrase themselves with is that, you know, they are quite literally the idea of... I guess if we use the Hive terminology, they are sword logic incarnate. They call themselves majestic because they believe they are the only rule and beautiful truth of the universe that exists. and they think of themselves as a fundamental force of the universe. Whether they are explicitly the source of the dark is a big question that becomes very relevant when you discuss that topic, because there's the idea of if the universe exists, the light and dark must also exist, and therefore you can't truly destroy the winnower or the traveler. So yeah, big questions about that. It goes to the heart of whether they actually are like key parts of the universe that truly must be. In which case, in order to defeat the winnower, we might not need to actually physically defeat them, but instead try to persuade them that their situation, their view on the way the universe should be, their outlook on things is just wrong. But
in some ways, and this is just my opinion, I thought that the witness was in fact going against the winnower, because by freezing everything in the final shape, that completely takes away from the sword logic that the winnower seems to live by.
leads us then into the second question you asked of, are there other knives? And to that I say, in a certain sense, to all of us, we are knives to the winnower. And it's on the basic premise of what is said in that one ship I was talking about. The winnower sits there and says, I'm so glad I'm here in this cosmos now, because somewhere, everywhere, all the time, even if it's in the tiniest of cells sending electrical charge, or if it's in the greatest of civilizations, someone is making my choice. Which is to say, someone is ensuring that the strong survive and the weak perish. You know, that's at the core of what the winnower believes. It's this idea of strength is right, might is right, and therefore without the ability to be mighty, you are not righteously surviving. You must exist this way because it's the way that the least suffering is inflicted on the universe. Otherwise, you're just prolonging the weak so they can suffer more.
Yeah, I do love that element of it. The whole survival and the flower game, and just the survival of what should exist in the universe. It goes very, very deep and
mega mind Darwinism. Actually, though,
like philosophical in that sense. I've always loved that storyline.
Exactly. It's brilliant too, because especially after having just defeated the witness, it's this grand retort. We thought that we'd conquered the ultimate evil, and it's been made clear that there is a separate entity that spawned the witness through some means. Obviously did not directly... It's not to say spawned as in it's the child of the winnower or some nonsense, because we know how the witness was created. But it is to sit there and say that it was the reason why the witness came to be. It had a hand in that. And it's also to imply that, hey, everything's still playing out as I imagined it would. Everything's still going to plan. Light or darkness, someone is still making my choice. It's a mastermind kind of villain.
But again, had the witness been successful, no one would be able to make that choice anymore. And so the question is, did the winnower play a role in our success?
That's what I think is brilliant. They've written it as such thus far, and they've given an open plane by which we can sit there and take the story in directions, and the winnower can now be a part of all this too. I'm really fascinated to see what happens, especially because this involves the Veil.
Yeah,
inevitably,
that was my next question, which is, so we have the winnower, which we now know is a confirmed thing, but then there's, I guess some of this stuff is maybe designed to be vague. I'm not sure if you have any insight on it, but how come loads of characters call the Traveler the Gardener, whereas, you would assume that the Gardener is something else, similar to the winnower, and then underneath the winnower you have the Veil, and underneath the Gardener you have the Traveler. Like, I always kind of assume the Traveler and the Veil are the counterparts, but the Traveler and the Veil aren't directly. But then at one point, one of the dissenters says about the Gardener and the Traveler, and then we saw this opposite, which is the Veil. But then it's just kind of, or just mainly, how come? Because the dissenter in the final, I think it's Iconoclasm, the final shape, final campaign mission, it does call the Traveler the Gardener. So, like, is the Traveler the Gardener, or is the Gardener above the Traveler, and the Veil?
So it's a bit of an, it's a bit of an interesting mix, right? The Gardener is a term that's used in multiple contexts, but the context you're thinking of there is purely of the society of the precursors, right? Where they called the Traveler the Gardener.
Right.
So for them, perhaps there isn't a difference, or alternatively, it's just their naming convention that is deliberately trying to create the muddling. That being said, in the actual communications we got from the Winnower way back in Shadowkeep, it refers to the Gardener as a separate entity, seemingly.
Right.
Now, again, there is nothing explicitly where it says Traveler in those logs, so it could very well be the same, and that's kind of where the theory of, well, if the Veil is one of those great sources of darkness, and if the Veil and the Traveler seemingly were linked at one point, much like how the Winnower and the Gardener were supposedly in the Garden before time, and if they even operate on the same frequency of paracausal energy, which is something we learn from the Veil containment logs, maybe it is the case that then the Traveler is to the Veil as the Gardener is to the Winnower, and there is a deeper entity within each of them. I think it's also worth remembering that one of the big concept pieces that was never used in Lightfall or Final Shape, but there is an animated piece for it, is of a Guardian actually within a suit falling into the kaleidoscopic part of the Veil. And the idea of beings interacting with the Veil, be it Maya Sundaresh or the citizens of Neomuna, and actually entering it either through the kind of cloud arc digital reality that they've been able to create on top of things, or by actually physically interacting with it in a much closer manner, it's not a foreign concept. So just in the same way that we've gone inside the Traveler, you have to question if one day we might actually go inside the Veil. If so,
Holy
maybe we
crap.
don't meet the Winnower, because again, we didn't technically meet the Gardener inside the Traveler, but I mean, we kind of did. And even if we did go in there, what are we going to find? Well, what are we going to see? What governs the interior of that dimension? I'm really fascinated by that question above all, because the underlying foundation and the vague hints within the lore are there. They're very prominently suggested at. Nothing is truly confirmed, and it gives Bungie the freedom to sort of write that story. I say Bungie. It gives the narrative team at Bungie the freedom to write those stories in the future. We've got to do this. We've got to differentiate between Bungie and the actual devs there. But yeah, no, it's exciting on that front, because it points in a direction, but we don't definitively know, and it gives them freedom to do what they want with that.
And the Winnower is the same character that Oryx spoke to when he communed with the Deep. Is that the same?
This is something we have more clarity on too. Yeah, no, a long time ago, but for those who don't know, old Hive lore, there's a thing called the Books of Sorrow, and at a certain point in time, Oryx communes with a being that is referred to as, quote, the Deep itself. And that seems to imply, in like later understandings of the lore, that Oryx was perhaps speaking to the Witness. But it was always something that didn't seem right, because the Witness and the Winnower used different pronouns, and the way that one spoke was completely different to the other. And it seems now very clear that yes, Oryx was clearly talking to the Winnower instead of talking to the Witness. And it's also that way because their objectives are completely different, right? Like, the Witness wanted a perfect stillness where everything was kind of in a harmony, almost, but nothing would ever change. But the Winnower is change incarnate. It is literally the force of entropy pushing the universe towards a better version of itself, as the Winnower would see it, something where it is literally sharper, right? The Witness's interpretation of the final shape is not about sharpness, it's about no change whatsoever, and it's about stillness. So, yeah, it seems more clear now than ever that Oryx was talking to the Winnower all that time 9 years ago.
Yeah, definitely not the Witness.
That's a huge thing all in itself, because it means that the claws this thing has go back way, way, way deeper. And I have very interesting thoughts about what's going to happen when it comes to heresy, because if there are interesting things going on with anything to do with the Dreadnought, there are relics and places and things that relate back to those conversations. So, I mean, if the Hive Pantheon is, as the narrative team is going to say, is being shaken up in a big manner, I wonder if that pertains partly to the Winnower.
So we could discuss this forever, but I think that'll do it for today. Lots to talk about today. You know, a big mixed bag of the success of Final Shape and the strange future of Destiny. But thank you all for watching and or listening, and thank you, Bye, for joining us. Of course, if you want to know anything about the lore or most of the things that we talked about today, Bife's got plenty of videos. He's got you covered. So definitely, if you haven't already, drop Bife a subscription and check out his videos. He's got tons of stuff. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. Let us know
Good
any
stuff,
thoughts
man.
and comments down below, and we'll see you in the next one.
That's good shit, dude. Good shit.
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.